You're about to discover why the book of Isaiah is called the fifth gospel by biblical scholars and how this ancient text contains over 400 prophecies that span from Isaiah's own time to the end of the world. Whether you're a longtime student of the Bible or completely new to Isaiah's writings, this documentary will take you through every chapter, every major theme, and every fulfilled prophecy in chronological order. We'll explore the historical context, decode the symbolic language, and reveal connections that will completely transform how you read not just Isaiah, but the entire Bible. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The enigma of Isaiah. All flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the flower of the field. These words, penned in the shadow of Babylon's towers, would echo through centuries of human sorrow and hope. They carry the weight of exile, the ache of loss, the stubborn flame of faith that refuses to die. The book of Isaiah presents us with a puzzle wrapped in poetry, a mystery dressed as prophecy. Beyond its religious significance, it operates as ancient political commentary, literary masterpiece, and revolutionary manifesto rolled into one scroll. At first glance, it may seem like the work of a single prophet, but beneath its surface lies something far more complex. Three voices speak through these 66 chapters. Three different eras breathe through its verses. Three separate crises shaped its words. Each generation faced empires that seemed unstoppable, rulers who claimed divine authority, and promises that appeared impossible to fulfill. The first voice emerges from 8th century Judah, when Assyrian armies marched like locusts across the ancient lands. This prophet walked palace corridors and temple courts, warning kings and comforting the faithful. His words cut through royal pretension like lightning through darkness. The second voice rises from Babylonian exile, where Jewish captives wept by foreign rivers. This unnamed prophet offered comfort to the broken, promised return to the scattered, and reimagined God's relationship with creation itself. His theology would reshape how humanity understood the divine. The third voice speaks from the ruins of return, when former exiles discovered that homecoming brought new heartaches. This prophet addressed corruption among the faithful, opened doors to foreign converts, and painted visions of cosmic renewal that still inspire dreamers today. Together, these voices created something unprecedented in ancient literature. They wove together judgment and mercy, nationalism and universalism, despair and hope into a tapestry that has never been replicated. The book they left behind would influence Jesus of Nazareth, inspire the civil rights movement, and provide ammunition for both oppressors and liberators throughout history. But here lies the enigma. How can one book speak so perfectly to such different moments in human experience? How can ancient words about long-dead empires still burn with relevance in our modern world? The answer takes us deep into the heart of prophecy itself, where past, present, and future collapse into a single, eternal moment of truth. This story begins in the shadow of empire, in a small kingdom caught between superpowers, where one man's vision would change the course of human thought forever. What even is the book of Isaiah? Open the book of Isaiah and you enter three different worlds. The first world burns with the fire of immediate judgment. Kings tremble, cities fall, and a prophet's voice cuts through royal comfort like a sword through silk. This world spans chapters 1 through 39, where Assyrian armies cast shadows across the ancient Near East. The second world opens with the gentlest words in all of Scripture. Comfort, comfort my people. Here, in chapters 40 through 55, the tone shifts like morning mist giving way to sunlight. Gone are the harsh warnings to kings. Instead, a voice speaks tenderly to exiles, promising return, proclaiming hope, and revealing God as the sole ruler of all creation. The third world, chapters 56 through 66, presents us with the messy reality of homecoming. Former exiles discover that return brings new challenges. Corruption creeps back into the temple. Social justice remains elusive. Yet this final voice paints the most breathtaking visions of all: new heavens, new earth, and the wolf lying down with the lamb. These three sections read like three different books. Their historical settings span centuries. Their literary styles vary dramatically. their theological emphases shift and evolve. Modern scholars call them First Isaiah, Second Isaiah, and Third Isaiah, or more elegantly, Proto Isaiah, Deutero Isaiah, and Trito Isaiah. But ancient readers saw something different. They recognized these voices as variations on a single theme, like a symphony played in three movements. The same concerns echo throughout: justice for the oppressed, judgment upon the corrupt, hope for the faithful, and God's ultimate sovereignty over human affairs. The book operates on multiple levels simultaneously. As historical document, it records the rise and fall of ancient empires. As theological treatise, it explores the relationship between divine justice and mercy. As literary masterpiece, it employs every device known to Hebrew poetry: metaphor, parallelism, irony, and imagery so vivid it burns itself into memory. Beyond its religious significance, Isaiah functions as political commentary of the highest order. Its authors understood how empires operated, how power corrupted, and how ordinary people suffered under the weight of imperial ambition. They wrote not just for their own generation, but for all future generations who would face similar crises. The book's structure mirrors its message. Judgment chapters lead to comfort chapters, which give way to restoration chapters. This progression, crisis, hope, renewal, became the pattern through which Jewish and Christian communities would understand their own historical experiences for millennia to come. Each section employs different literary genres. First Isaiah reads like court prophecy, with its formal oracles and political intrigue. Second Isaiah flows like liturgical poetry designed for worship and comfort. Third Isaiah combines prophetic vision with practical ethics, addressing the real-world challenges of religious community life. The theological development across these three sections traces one of the most remarkable intellectual journeys in ancient literature. The first Isaiah emphasizes God's holiness and justice. The second develops radical monotheism and universal salvation. The third envisions cosmic renewal and inclusive worship. This progression reveals not confusion, but sophistication. The book's authors understood that different times required different emphases. Crisis demanded warning. Exile needed comfort. Return called for vision. Each voice spoke the message its generation most needed to hear. The book of Isaiah stands as perhaps the most influential prophetic work ever written. Its words shaped Jesus' understanding of his mission. Its visions inspired countless reform movements. Its poetry provided language for humanity's deepest hopes and fears. More than scripture, it became the vocabulary through which Western civilization learned to speak about justice, suffering, hope, and divine purpose in human history. Ancient Judah, the political earthquake. Picture a small mountain kingdom perched between superpowers, like a sparrow's nest built between two fighting eagles. This was Judah in the 8th century before the Common Era, a land caught in the deadly game of ancient Near Eastern politics, where one wrong move meant extinction. The world around Judah trembled with imperial ambition. To the northeast, Assyria stretched its iron fist across Mesopotamia, swallowing kingdoms like a beast devouring prey. Their armies moved with mechanical precision, their siege engines reduced proud cities to rubble, and their policy of forced deportation scattered entire peoples across their empire. To the southwest, Egypt stirred with dreams of restored glory. The land of the pharaohs remembered when their chariots rolled through Canaan, when tribute flowed from these mountain kingdoms to Memphis and Thebes. Egyptian gold still whispered promises of alliance to any ruler brave enough to resist Assyrian domination. Between these giants, smaller kingdoms scrambled for survival. Damascus ruled the fertile valleys of Aram, Syria. Samaria controlled the northern highlands of what had once been united under David and Solomon. Philistine cities guarded the coastal plains. Each calculated their chances, weighed their options, and made desperate bargains with one empire or another. Judah occupied the most precarious position of all. Too small to matter, too strategically located to ignore, the kingdom centered on Jerusalem sat astride the crucial trade routes that connected Africa to Asia. Any empire seeking to control this crossroads had to deal with whoever ruled from David's ancient capital. The kingdom's internal politics reflected these external pressures. Royal advisors split into factions, some advocating alliance with Assyria, others pushing for Egyptian support, still others arguing for armed resistance or careful neutrality. Each faction believed their strategy offered the path to survival. King after king faced impossible choices: submit to Assyria and become a vassal, paying crushing tribute while watching your people's resources flow to foreign masters. Resist and face the full weight of the world's most efficient military machine. Ally with Egypt and risk Assyrian retaliation when Egyptian promises proved empty. The social fabric of Judah strained under these pressures. Wealthy landowners accumulated more property, while small farmers lost their ancestral holdings to debt. Urban merchants prospered from international trade, while rural communities struggled to pay royal taxes. Temple priests maintained their rituals while social justice crumbled in the courts. Religious life reflected political uncertainty. Traditional worship of Yahweh competed with foreign deities brought by merchants, diplomats, and refugees. Some Judeans hedged their spiritual bets, honoring Assyrian gods alongside their ancestral faith. Others retreated into exclusive nationalism, rejecting any foreign influence. The military situation grew more desperate each year. Judah's army could not match Assyrian siegecraft or Egyptian chariot forces. The kingdom's fortified cities might delay conquest, but could not prevent it. Geography offered some protection. Jerusalem's hilltop location made it difficult to assault, but no mountain stronghold had yet stopped Assyrian determination. Into this cauldron of political tension, social injustice, and religious confusion stepped a prophet whose words would outlast all the empires that threatened his small kingdom. But before we meet Isaiah ben Amoz, we must understand the world that shaped his vision. A world where prophecy and politics intertwined like lovers or enemies, where divine revelation and human calculation competed for the hearts of kings. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic encounters between faith and power, between divine truth and imperial might, between a mountain prophet and the empires that thought they ruled the world. Who was Isaiah? The man, the myth, the mouthpiece. In the corridors of power, where kings whispered with advisors and priests counted temple gold, walked a man who would outlive them all. Isaiah ben Amoz moved through Jerusalem's elite circles with the confidence of someone who belonged, yet spoke words that shattered comfortable assumptions about power, privilege, and divine favor. The name Isaiah means Yahweh saves, and salvation became the prophet's central theme, though not the kind of salvation his contemporaries expected. Born into Judah's aristocracy during the mid-8th century, Isaiah possessed advantages that most prophets lacked. His father Amoz may have been brother to King Amaziah, making Isaiah cousin to the royal line. This connection opened doors throughout Jerusalem's religious and political establishment. Unlike prophets who emerged from rural villages or temple schools, Isaiah navigated palace intrigue with insider knowledge. He understood how power operated, how decisions were made, and how the wealthy maintained their advantages over the poor. His social position gave weight to his words. When Isaiah condemned corruption, he spoke as someone who had witnessed it firsthand. When he criticized royal policy, he addressed kings as someone who belonged in their presence. When he promised judgment upon the elite, his warnings carried the authority of someone who moved in their circles. The prophet's calling came during a moment of national crisis. King Uzziah, who had ruled Judah for over 50 years, lay dying of leprosy in isolation. The kingdom mourned the loss of its most successful monarch while fearing what succession might bring. Political uncertainty filled the air like smoke from temple sacrifices. In this moment of vulnerability, Isaiah entered the Jerusalem temple and experienced a vision that would define his entire ministry. The details of this encounter, recorded in chapter 6 of his book, reveal not just divine revelation, but profound psychological insight into the nature of prophetic calling. The vision began with sensory overload. Isaiah saw Yahweh seated on a throne that filled the temple, surrounded by 6-winged seraphim whose voices shook the building's foundations. The prophet's first response was not joy or wonder, but terror. He recognized his unworthiness to stand in divine presence, confessing his moral pollution and that of his people. This confession reveals Isaiah's sophisticated understanding of human nature. Unlike prophets who claimed special righteousness, Isaiah began with radical honesty about his own limitations. This humility would characterize his entire ministry, as he consistently included himself among those needing divine forgiveness. The vision's climax came when one of the seraphim touched Isaiah's lips with a burning coal from the altar, symbolically purifying him for prophetic service. This moment established the central metaphor of Isaiah's ministry: words as fire, burning away falsehood and purifying hearts prepared to receive truth. When God asked who would carry divine messages to the people, Isaiah volunteered immediately. But the commission he received was darker than he expected. God warned that his words would harden hearts, blind eyes, and deafen ears. The prophet would speak truth that most would reject, offer hope that few would embrace, and proclaim salvation that would come only through judgment. This paradoxical calling shaped Isaiah's understanding of his role. He served not as popular teacher, but as faithful witness, speaking divine truth regardless of human response. His success would be measured not by immediate results, but by long-term faithfulness to his commission. Isaiah's ministry spanned the reigns of four kings: Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, covering roughly 40 years of Judean history. During this period, he witnessed the rise of Assyrian power, the fall of the northern kingdom, multiple siege attempts against Jerusalem, and the constant struggle between faith and political calculation that defined royal policy. His words reached beyond his own generation because they addressed perennial human problems: the corruption of power, the suffering of innocence, the tension between divine justice and mercy, and the hope for ultimate restoration despite present darkness. These themes would echo through centuries of human experience, making Isaiah's voice as relevant to future generations as it was to his own. The call of a prophet, fire on the lips. The year King Uzziah died, heaven touched earth in the Jerusalem temple, and a young aristocrat's life changed forever. Isaiah's vision, recorded with vivid precision in chapter 6, stands among the most psychologically complex divine encounters in ancient literature. More than supernatural spectacle, it reveals the internal transformation required for prophetic ministry. The timing was crucial. Uzziah had ruled Judah for 52 years, bringing unprecedented prosperity and military success. His death marked the end of an era, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to external threats and internal uncertainty. Into this moment of national anxiety came a vision that would redefine how one man understood divine presence and human responsibility. Isaiah entered the temple, probably for routine worship, but found himself transported into the heavenly throne room. The boundaries between earthly and divine reality dissolved as he witnessed Yahweh seated on a throne so massive it filled the entire temple. The image suggests divine majesty beyond human comprehension, not a God confined to human structures, but one whose presence transforms any space it enters. Above the throne flew six-winged seraphim, creatures whose very name means burning ones. Two wings covered their faces, acknowledging that even celestial beings cannot look directly upon divine glory. Two wings covered their feet, maintaining modesty in the divine presence. Two wings enabled flight, allowing them to serve as divine messengers. Their positioning around the throne created a living testimony to divine holiness. The seraphim song shook the temple to its foundations. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. This triple repetition emphasized absolute divine transcendence while simultaneously proclaiming universal divine presence. The paradox captured something essential about Yahweh's nature: simultaneously beyond human reach, yet intimately involved in human affairs. The building itself responded to this heavenly worship. Doorposts shook, smoke filled the sanctuary, and the normal order of temple service dissolved into chaos. Isaiah found himself caught between earthly worship and heavenly reality, experiencing the inadequacy of human religious forms when confronted with actual divine presence. His first response was not wonder, but terror. Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. This confession reveals profound self-awareness. Isaiah recognized that divine holiness exposed human moral pollution, making all claims to righteousness appear pathetic. The specificity of his confession, unclean lips, proved prophetic. His calling would center on speech, on words that carried divine authority. But first, those lips required purification through divine fire. One of the seraphim flew to him, carrying a live coal from the altar, touching it to his mouth with words that transformed his entire identity. Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. This purification scene established fire as the central metaphor for Isaiah's ministry. His words would burn like coals, consuming falsehood and purifying hearts ready to receive truth. But this fire would also bring pain, as divine truth often burned away comfortable illusions that people preferred to maintain. When God asked, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" Isaiah responded immediately, "Here am I, send me." His eagerness reveals the transformative power of his temple experience. The man who had just confessed his unworthiness now volunteered for divine service, demonstrating how divine forgiveness enables human ministry. But God's commission contained a shocking twist. Isaiah's preaching would harden hearts rather than soften them, blind eyes rather than open them, deafen ears rather than make them hear. The prophet would speak truth that most people would reject, making them more resistant to future divine messages rather than more receptive. This paradoxical calling troubled Isaiah deeply. He asked how long this hardening process would continue, receiving the devastating answer, "Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate." Judgment would come first, then restoration. His ministry would span both divine wrath and divine mercy. The vision concluded with a promise wrapped in threat. Though the land would be destroyed like a felled tree, a holy seed would remain in the stump. This remnant theology would become central to Isaiah's message. Not universal salvation, but faithful preservation of those prepared to trust divine promises despite apparent evidence to the contrary. This temple vision shaped everything that followed in Isaiah's 40-year ministry. It gave him unshakable confidence in divine authority, profound humility about human nature, and patient endurance when his message met rejection. Most importantly, it established his identity as someone whose words carried divine fire, burning away illusion, purifying hearts, and preparing the way for ultimate restoration. The first warnings: judgment is coming. The prophet's earliest messages erupted like volcanic fire, searing through Jerusalem's comfortable assumptions about divine favor and national security. Isaiah's opening chapters present a devastating portrait of moral collapse disguised as religious prosperity, where temple worship flourished, while social justice withered like grapes on a poisoned vine. "Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me." These opening words established Isaiah's characteristic style, cosmic imagery framing intimate family relationships. The entire universe served as witness to a domestic tragedy played out on the stage of national politics. The prophet painted Judah as a battered spouse, wounded from head to foot, but refusing to acknowledge the source of her injuries. "Your country lies desolate, your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, aliens devour your land." This description captured both literal military devastation and spiritual bankruptcy, as foreign influences corrupted traditional worship while external enemies threatened national survival. But Isaiah's harshest criticism targeted religious hypocrisy. The people maintained elaborate temple rituals while ignoring divine demands for justice. Their sacrifices had become meaningless offerings, their incense detestable, their festivals a burden that God could no longer bear. The prophet exposed how religious activity could mask moral failure, how ceremonial correctness could coexist with ethical corruption. The contrast was stark. Jerusalem's rulers do not defend the orphan, and the widow's cause does not come before them. Instead of protecting society's most vulnerable members, they collaborated in their exploitation. Justice became a commodity for sale, with verdicts going to the highest bidder rather than the most righteous cause. Isaiah's famous vineyard song captured this moral decay through agricultural metaphor. God had planted Judah like a choice vineyard on fertile soil, cleared away stones, built a watchtower, and prepared a winepress. Divine care had provided every advantage for producing good fruit. But when harvest time came, the vineyard yielded only wild grapes, bloodshed instead of justice, outcry instead of righteousness. The agricultural imagery would have resonated powerfully with Isaiah's audience. Everyone understood how disappointing it was to invest time and effort in a vineyard, only to discover that the fruit was inedible. The prophet used this common experience to illuminate divine disappointment with human moral failure. Economic oppression received particular attention in these early chapters. Wealthy landowners join house to house and add field to field, accumulating property while displacing small farmers. This concentration of wealth created a class of rootless poor who had lost their ancestral inheritance, their economic security, and their social standing. The prophet described the inevitable consequences of such policies. Empty houses would stand as monuments to greed. Productive vineyards would yield barely enough to survive, and the land itself would rebel against those who had violated its moral order. Economic injustice would produce economic collapse as surely as poisoned soil yields poisoned fruit. Women's fashion became another target for prophetic criticism. Isaiah cataloged the elaborate accessories that wealthy women wore: ankle chains, headbands, crescents, pendants, bracelets, scarves, headdresses, armlets, sashes, perfume boxes, and amulets. This detailed inventory revealed intimate knowledge of elite culture while condemning its vanity and excess. But the prophet's concern went deeper than fashion criticism. These ornaments represented resources diverted from social justice to personal luxury. While wealthy women adorned themselves with expensive accessories, widows and orphans suffered from neglect. The contrast exposed moral priorities that valued appearance over compassion. The coming judgment would reverse these priorities. Women who once walked with outstretched necks, glancing wantonly with their eyes, mincing along as they go, would find themselves bald, stripped of their finery, and marked with shame. Beauty would give way to baldness, fine clothes to sackcloth, and elaborate hairstyles to the rope of captivity. Yet even in these harsh early messages, Isaiah hinted at hope beyond judgment. The final verses of chapter 4 promised that those who survived divine purification would experience renewed blessing. A remnant would emerge from the fire, purified and prepared for a restored relationship with their God. These opening chapters established the pattern that would characterize Isaiah's entire ministry: unflinching diagnosis of moral disease, followed by warning of inevitable consequences, but always with hope for those willing to trust divine mercy rather than human strength. The sign of Emmanuel: politics and prophecy collide. In the shadow of Damascus, where two nervous kings plotted revolution against Assyrian overlordship, the fate of Judah hung by a thread thinner than spider's silk. King Ahaz faced the crisis of his reign: join the rebellion and risk Assyrian retaliation, or remain loyal and face immediate invasion by the rebel coalition. Into this political maelstrom stepped Isaiah with words that would echo through millennia: "Behold, a virgin shall conceive." The Syro-Ephraimite War, as historians call this forgotten conflict, began with desperate mathematics. Rezin of Damascus and Pekah of Samaria calculated that their combined forces plus Egyptian support might successfully resist Assyrian taxation. But their rebellion required broader participation. Every small kingdom had to choose sides, and neutrality was not an option. Ahaz received their ultimatum with trembling hands: join the revolt or face immediate invasion. The rebel kings planned to replace him with someone more cooperative, the son of Tabeel, whose very name suggests foreign origin. The Davidic dynasty that had ruled from Jerusalem for centuries faced extinction at the hands of fellow Hebrew kings. The young monarch's fear was palpable. Isaiah reported that his heart and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. Royal confidence collapsed like a house built on sand when the storm winds of international politics began to blow. Everything his dynasty had built seemed about to crumble. Isaiah appeared at this moment of crisis with a message that mixed political advice with prophetic insight. He found Ahaz inspecting Jerusalem's water supply, probably calculating how long the city could withstand siege, and delivered words that cut through panic with divine clarity: "Take heed, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint." The prophet's political analysis was shrewd. These rebel kings were nothing more than two smoldering stumps of firebrands. Their power was already broken, their rebellion doomed to failure. Within 65 years, Ephraim would cease to exist as a people, a prediction that proved remarkably accurate when Assyrian deportation policies scattered the northern kingdom's population across the empire. But Ahaz struggled to trust prophetic counsel when enemy armies massed on his borders. The king's advisors probably urged immediate alliance with Assyria. arguing that Tiglath-Pileser's protection was worth the heavy tribute payments such alliance would require. Better to be a living vassal than a dead independent ruler. Isaiah understood these calculations, but offered an alternative based on divine promise rather than human alliance. He challenged Ahaz to ask for a sign, any sign, that would confirm God's commitment to protect David's dynasty. The prophet essentially offered to prove divine reliability through supernatural demonstration. The king's refusal seems pious on the surface. I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test, but Isaiah recognized this as cowardice disguised as reverence. Ahaz had already decided to trust Assyrian protection rather than divine promise. His apparent humility masked faithlessness that would doom his kingdom to generations of foreign domination. Frustrated by royal stubbornness, Isaiah announced that God would provide a sign anyway. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel. This cryptic prophecy has puzzled interpreters for centuries, generating more theological debate than perhaps any other biblical verse. The immediate context suggests a royal birth. Some young woman, possibly Ahaz's wife, possibly Isaiah's own wife, would give birth to a son whose name meant God with us. Before this child reached the age of moral responsibility, the threat from Damascus and Samaria would disappear. The sign offered both comfort and warning. Divine presence would protect Judah, but the king's faithlessness would bring other troubles. The prophetic wordplay was brilliant. Emmanuel promised divine presence while implying human absence. God would be with his people, but where would their human leaders be? The name suggested both protection and abandonment, comfort and judgment, hope and warning wrapped together in a single promise. Archaeological evidence confirms Isaiah's political analysis. Assyrian records show that Tiglath-Pileser III crushed the rebel coalition with devastating efficiency. Damascus fell in 732, its king executed, and its population deported. Samaria survived a few more years, but eventually suffered the same fate. The two smoldering stumps were indeed extinguished. But Ahaz's decision to become an Assyrian vassal brought exactly the consequences Isaiah had warned against. The king traveled to Damascus to pay homage to his new overlord, returning with plans for an altar built according to Assyrian specifications. Foreign religious practices entered the Jerusalem temple, corrupting traditional worship and symbolizing Judah's political submission. The Emmanuel prophecy thus worked on multiple levels simultaneously. It offered immediate comfort about the current crisis while warning of future troubles. It promised divine protection while condemning human faithlessness. It celebrated royal birth while questioning dynastic faithfulness. Most remarkably, it established a pattern of divine presence in human history that future generations would continue to discover in their own moments of crisis. A child is born, hope in the shadow of empire. From the darkness of Assyrian dominance emerged words that would kindle hope in human hearts for millennia. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These luminous phrases burst forth like sunrise after the longest night, promising light that no empire could extinguish. The historical context makes this prophecy even more remarkable. Assyria had reached the peak of its power, ruling from the Zagros Mountains to the Egyptian border with administrative efficiency that left little room for local independence. Their tribute demands drained Judean resources, while their cultural influence corrupted traditional worship. Yet in this moment of apparent hopelessness, Isaiah proclaimed the birth of a king whose reign would surpass all earthly empires. The prophet's language deliberately evoked royal coronation ceremonies. Ancient Near Eastern rulers received throne names that proclaimed their divine mandate and political program. Egyptian pharaohs bore titles like Son of Ra and Beloved of the Gods. Mesopotamian kings styled themselves King of Kings and Shepherd of the Peoples. Isaiah adapted this royal tradition while transforming its meaning. Wonderful Counselor suggested wisdom beyond human understanding. Unlike earthly advisors whose counsel reflected limited knowledge and personal ambition, this king would possess divine insight into the complexities of justice, mercy, and governance. His decisions would spring from perfect understanding rather than political calculation. Mighty God pushed royal theology to its breaking point. While ancient kings claimed divine support or even divine nature, Isaiah attributed actual deity to this coming ruler. The phrase suggests not just divine blessing, but divine identity, a king who would exercise God authority over human affairs. Everlasting Father, promised paternal care that transcended dynastic succession. Earthly kings died, often leaving their subjects vulnerable to conquest or civil war. This king would provide permanent protection, nurturing his people with the constancy of divine love rather than the fickleness of human politics. Prince of Peace offered the blessing that Assyrian rule could never provide. Imperial peace came through military domination and administrative control, creating order through fear rather than justice. This king would establish peace through righteousness, harmony through divine rule, rather than human coercion. The prophecy continued with promises that defied contemporary reality. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. Assyrian pressure had reduced Davidic authority to administrative functions within a small tributary state. Yet Isaiah envisioned expansion rather than contraction, growth rather than diminishment. The foundation of this coming kingdom would be justice and righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. This represented a direct challenge to Assyrian imperial ideology, which justified conquest through superior military power and administrative efficiency. Isaiah promised a different kind of kingdom, built on moral principles rather than political pragmatism. These chapters also contain some of Isaiah's most beautiful poetry about divine guidance. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. This imagery would have resonated powerfully with people who felt overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. The prophet described transformation that touched every aspect of human experience. Military equipment would become farming tools as the boot of the tramping warrior, and the garment rolled in blood would be burned as fuel for the fire. Resources devoted to warfare would be redirected toward productive agriculture and peaceful commerce. Yet Isaiah grounded these soaring promises in contemporary political reality. The child would be born into the existing Davidic line, not as a supernatural appearance, but as a human infant who would grow in wisdom and stature. Divine intervention would work through natural processes rather than against them. The prophet also included darker themes alongside these hopeful promises. Divine anger still burned against injustice, and judgment would precede restoration. Therefore, the Lord does not rejoice over their young people or have compassion on their orphans and widows, for everyone is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. This balanced perspective prevented Isaiah's hope from becoming mere wishful thinking. He understood that transformation required divine intervention because human nature alone could not produce the justice and righteousness he envisioned. The coming king would succeed where human rulers had failed because he would possess divine wisdom and power. The prophecy concluded with the firm declaration that the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Human effort alone could not accomplish such transformation, but divine commitment guaranteed eventual fulfillment. The same God who had established David's dynasty would ensure its ultimate triumph over all opposing forces. These words sustained faith through centuries of foreign domination, exile, and return. They provided vocabulary for hope when circumstances seemed hopeless, promises of light when darkness appeared permanent. Most importantly, they established the pattern of divine presence working through human history to accomplish purposes that transcended immediate political circumstances. Woes. Upon the nations, Isaiah as international critic. Isaiah's prophetic gaze swept beyond Judah's borders like an eagle surveying the entire ancient world, pronouncing divine judgment upon empires that had forgotten their mortality. In chapters 13 through 23, the prophet transforms into international correspondent, geopolitical analyst, and divine prosecutor, rolled into one voice that speaks truth to power across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The oracle against Babylon opens with cosmic imagery that makes earthly empires seem insignificant by comparison. See, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the earth a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. Stars will withhold their light, the sun will be darkened and the moon will refuse to shine. Against such divine intervention, human military might appears pathetic. Yet Isaiah's criticism of Babylon was deeply informed by contemporary politics. Babylon in the 8th century had not yet achieved the imperial dominance it would later exercise over Judah. Assyria still controlled Mesopotamia, keeping Babylonian ambitions in check. But Isaiah perceived the underlying dynamics that would eventually bring Babylon to prominence and to judgment. The prophet's knowledge of international affairs was remarkably sophisticated. He understood how empire building created internal contradictions that eventually led to collapse. Babylon's future glory would rest on exploitation of conquered peoples, absorption of foreign populations, and the hubris that comes with apparently unlimited power. The oracle against Assyria struck closer to home, addressing the superpower that currently dominated Judean affairs. I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains trample him underfoot. His yoke shall be removed from them, and his burden from their shoulders. This promise must have seemed impossible to Isaiah's contemporaries, who lived under the shadow of Assyrian military superiority. But the prophet understood something about imperial psychology that escaped contemporary observers. Assyria's success bred the arrogance that would eventually destroy it. Their kings began to believe their own propaganda about divine mandate and unlimited power. This hubris would make them vulnerable to the very forces they thought they controlled. The prophecy against Philistia reveals Isaiah's strategic thinking about regional power balances. Do not rejoice, all you Philistines, that the rod that struck you is broken, for from the root of the snake will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying, fiery serpent. One threat might disappear, but others would take its place. This warning proved prescient. Philistine cities that celebrated temporary relief from Assyrian pressure soon faced renewed threats from other directions. The geopolitical vacuum created by Assyrian decline would be filled by Babylonian expansion, then Persian conquest, then Greek domination. Isaiah grasped the cyclical nature of imperial rise and fall. The burden concerning Moab demonstrates Isaiah's intimate knowledge of regional geography and economics. He describes specific cities, Ar, Kir, Heshbon, Eliala, with the precision of someone who understood their strategic importance. These weren't random place names, but key nodes in the trade networks that connected Arabia to the Mediterranean. Moab's coming devastation would stem from their prosperity. Their fertile plateaus produced grain that fed international markets. Their location controlled crucial trade routes between north and south. But this wealth made them attractive targets for imperial expansion and vulnerable to economic warfare. The oracle against Damascus reveals Isaiah's understanding of alliance politics. Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. This prediction addressed one of Judah's most persistent threats, the Aramean kingdom that had repeatedly invaded Israelite territory and pressured Jerusalem into unfavorable treaties. But Isaiah connected Damascus's fate to broader regional patterns. Their destruction would come not through Judean military action, but through imperial dynamics beyond local control. When superpowers clashed, smaller kingdoms became casualties, regardless of their diplomatic maneuvering. The prophecy concerning Ethiopia shows Isaiah's awareness of African politics and their impact on Middle Eastern affairs. Ethiopian pharaohs had recently gained control of Egypt, creating a new power center that challenged Assyrian dominance. But the prophet warned against trusting in Ethiopian military support. At that time, gifts will be brought to the Lord of hosts from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering. Isaiah envisioned eventual Ethiopian submission to divine authority rather than continued reliance on military power. The burden concerning Egypt occupies an entire chapter, reflecting that nation's crucial role in regional politics. Isaiah describes internal civil war, Egyptian against Egyptian, city against city, kingdom against kingdom, followed by foreign conquest and economic collapse. The prophet's analysis of Egyptian vulnerabilities was penetrating. Their economy depended on Nile agriculture, making them vulnerable to changes in river patterns. Their military relied on foreign mercenaries, creating loyalty problems during extended campaigns. Their religious system fostered political division rather than unity. Most remarkably, Isaiah predicted eventual spiritual transformation of these traditional enemies. On that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the center of the land of Egypt and a pillar to the Lord at its border. Former oppressors would become worshippers, former enemies would become allies. The oracle against Babylon returns with even greater intensity, describing the city's fall in vivid detail. Fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the images of her gods lie shattered on the ground. This prophecy would prove accurate down to specific details when Cyrus conquered the city without a battle in 539 BCE. But Isaiah's concern went beyond political prediction to moral analysis. These empires fell because they violated fundamental principles of justice and mercy. They treated conquered peoples as disposable resources rather than fellow human beings. They claimed divine authority while acting with demonic cruelty. The final oracle against Tyre addresses economic empire rather than military conquest. This Phoenician city controlled Mediterranean trade networks through commercial innovation rather than territorial expansion. Yet Isaiah warned that economic power carried the same moral responsibilities as political authority. At the end of 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her trade and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Commercial relationships could become as exploitative as military domination, requiring the same divine judgment. These international oracles established Isaiah as more than a local prophet addressing Judean concerns. He understood the interconnected nature of ancient politics, the moral responsibilities that came with power, and the divine principles that governed all human affairs. His words spoke not just to his contemporaries, but to all future generations who would face similar temptations of empire and exploitation. The Fall of the North, when prophecy becomes history. The year 722 BCE arrived like thunder after lightning, fulfilling Isaiah's darkest warnings with devastating precision. Samaria, capital of the northern kingdom that had once rivaled Jerusalem in wealth and power, fell to Assyrian siege engines after 3 years of desperate resistance. With its collapse, half of the Hebrew inheritance vanished into the maw of imperial deportation policy. Sargon II's victory dispatches, carved into stone and displayed across his empire, recorded the grim statistics of conquest. 27,290 Israelites marched into exile, scattered across Assyrian territories from Media to Mesopotamia. In their place came foreign colonists from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, mixing bloodlines and religious traditions until the original identity dissolved like salt in water. This catastrophe vindicated Isaiah's prophetic ministry while breaking his heart. For decades, he had warned that divine judgment would fall upon kingdoms that abandoned justice for political expedience. The northern kingdom's destruction provided unmistakable evidence that his words carried divine authority rather than merely human opinion. The roots of this disaster stretched back through generations of moral compromise and political miscalculation. Northern kings had embraced religious syncretism, allowing Canaanite fertility cults to flourish alongside traditional Hebrew worship. They had pursued alliance policies that valued immediate advantage over long-term faithfulness. They had permitted economic exploitation that concentrated wealth while impoverishing the masses. Jeroboam II's reign had brought unprecedented prosperity to the northern kingdom during the early 8th century. Archaeological evidence reveals massive building projects, expanded trade networks, and accumulation of luxury goods that rivaled Solomon's golden age. But this wealth masked spiritual corruption that Isaiah's contemporary, the prophet Amos, had exposed with devastating clarity. The final crisis began when Hoshea, last king of Israel, attempted to play empire against empire. He withheld tribute from Assyria while seeking Egyptian support for independence. This gamble reflected desperation rather than strategy, as Egypt was in no position to challenge Assyrian dominance effectively. Shalmaneser Faith responded to this rebellion with characteristic Assyrian efficiency. His army surrounded Samaria, cutting off supply lines and beginning the slow process of starvation that would eventually break the city's resistance. The siege lasted 3 years, demonstrating both Israelite determination and Assyrian patience. Archaeological excavations at Samaria reveal the final days of the northern kingdom. Hasty repairs to defensive walls, hoarded supplies of grain and oil, and evidence of increasingly desperate attempts to maintain resistance tell the story of a doomed city fighting against inevitable defeat. The human cost of this catastrophe extended far beyond mere statistics. Families were torn apart as deportation policies deliberately separated relatives to prevent organized resistance. Traditional communities that had maintained their identity for centuries found themselves scattered among foreign populations with alien customs and languages. Most tragically, the Northern Kingdom's religious heritage largely disappeared with political independence. The sacred traditions that had preserved divine revelation for generations were diluted beyond recognition as foreign gods entered the land and foreign peoples intermarried with the remaining population. Isaiah observed these events from Jerusalem, knowing that his own kingdom faced similar temptations and similar dangers. The fall of Samaria served as both warning and opportunity for Judah. Would they learn from their northern cousins' mistakes, or would they repeat the same errors with equally devastating consequences? The prophet's response to this crisis reveals his theological sophistication. He neither gloated over northern Israel's punishment nor despaired about divine justice. Instead, he used the catastrophe to illustrate how divine judgment worked through historical processes rather than supernatural intervention. Assyrian success demonstrated divine sovereignty rather than challenging it. The empire served as an instrument of judgment, unknowingly carrying out divine purposes while pursuing their own imperial ambitions. This perspective allowed Isaiah to maintain faith in divine justice while acknowledging the reality of political and military power. But the prophet also warned that instruments of judgment could become targets of judgment themselves. Assyria's success bred arrogance that would eventually provoke divine response. When the Lord has finished all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will punish the arrogant boasting of the king of Assyria and his haughty pride. The northern kingdom's fall also intensified Isaiah's hope for eventual restoration. If judgment could come through historical processes, then so could salvation. The same divine power that had scattered Israel could regather them. The same divine justice that had punished unfaithfulness could reward repentance. In that day, the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no more lean on the one who struck them, but will lean on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. This promise of restoration looked beyond immediate political circumstances to divine purposes that transcended imperial rise and fall. The fall of the northern kingdom thus became a crucial moment in Isaiah's theological development. It confirmed his understanding of divine judgment while deepening his hope for divine mercy. It demonstrated the reliability of prophetic words while pointing toward fulfillment that lay beyond his own generation. Most importantly, it established the pattern through which future Jewish communities would understand their own experiences of exile and return. The northern kingdom's disappearance became a warning about the consequences of unfaithfulness, while the promise of restoration became hope for all who would trust divine mercy rather than human strength. Assyria at the gates, the siege of Jerusalem. The year 701 BCE arrives like thunder across the hills of Judah. Sennacherib's war machine rolls south from Nineveh, consuming cities like a wildfire consumes dry grass. The Assyrian king has already crushed 46 fortified towns. Now his eyes turn toward the prize that has eluded him. Jerusalem. King Hezekiah paces the palace walls. Below him, refugees flood through the gates. Farmers clutch their children. Merchants abandon their goods. The countryside empties as terror spreads faster than news. Hezekiah has made his choice. He has rebelled against Assyria. The tribute payments have stopped. The consequences now march toward his doorstep. Isaiah walks these same walls. The prophet who once warned against trusting in horses and chariots now faces the ultimate test of his words. Will the Holy One of Jacob truly protect his chosen city? Or will Jerusalem fall like Samaria, like Damascus, like every other kingdom that dared oppose the Assyrian eagle? The siege engines arrive first. Massive wooden towers roll forward on countless wheels. Behind them march the archers, their bronze-tipped arrows glinting in the morning sun. The sound of 10,000 boots striking earth creates a rhythm of dread. Sennacherib himself remains at Lachish, directing the assault on that fortress city. But his presence hovers over Jerusalem like a shadow. Hezekiah's advisors whisper urgent counsel. Some urge surrender, others propose desperate alliances with Egypt. The king's treasury dwindles as he strips gold from the temple doors, desperate to buy time. Even the silver overlays from the pillars are torn away and melted down. Still, the Assyrian demands grow larger. Tribute becomes humiliation. Humiliation becomes impossible. Through these dark hours, Isaiah's voice cuts through the panic. The prophet who once proclaimed judgment now speaks comfort to the terrified king. Do not fear the words you have heard, he declares. The king of Assyria shall not come into this city or shoot an arrow there. These words seem impossible against the evidence of eyes and ears. The siege equipment grows closer each day. The Rabshakeh arrives with his message. This Assyrian field commander stands before Jerusalem's walls and shouts his challenge in perfect Hebrew. His words are calculated to break morale. Has any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? He calls. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? The psychological warfare strikes deep. Every person listening knows the litany of fallen cities. They have seen the refugees. They know the stories of empty temples and silenced priests. The Rabshakeh presses his advantage. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord. Something unexpected happens. The people remain silent. They do not respond to the taunts or the promises of comfortable exile. Perhaps Isaiah's years of preaching have taken root. Perhaps desperation has bred a strange kind of faith. The silence itself becomes a form of resistance. Hezekiah tears his clothes when he hears the full message. He covers himself in rough cloth and goes to the temple. There, in the presence of the ark, he spreads out the written demands before the altar. His prayer rises like incense. O Lord God of hosts, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of earth, you have made heaven and earth. Isaiah's response comes swift and sharp. The word of the Lord burns on his lips like the coal that once touched them. Because you have raged against me and your complacency has come up into my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came. The prophet's words seem to defy reality. Assyrian power has never been successfully challenged. Their military machine appears unstoppable. Their gods seem stronger than all others. Yet Isaiah speaks of divine intervention with the confidence of one who has stood in the heavenly court. Then comes the night that changes everything. The angel of death walks through the Assyrian camp. By morning, 185,000 soldiers lie still. The siege engines stand abandoned. The archers' bows remain unstrung. Sennacherib himself survives, but his army has melted away like snow before the sun. The Assyrian king retreats to Nineveh. There, in the house of his god Nisroch, his own sons strike him down. The empire that seemed eternal proves mortal after all. The gods of Assyria cannot protect their greatest champion from the knives of his own children. Jerusalem remains unconquered. The temple still stands. Hezekiah's gamble on divine protection has paid off in ways that still echo through history. But more than military victory, something theological has shifted. The God of Jacob has demonstrated power over the mightiest empire on earth. Isaiah's words have proved true not through human strength, but through divine intervention that defies all expectation. The siege of Jerusalem becomes a defining moment in biblical faith. It establishes the pattern of impossible deliverance that will echo through centuries of Jewish and Christian belief. When human resources fail and earthly powers overwhelm, there remains another court of appeal. The Holy One of Israel has proved capable of protecting his own. Yet questions linger in the aftermath. Why does God intervene here, but not elsewhere? Why does Jerusalem escape when other cities fall? Isaiah offers no simple answers, only the mystery of divine choice operating within the chaos of imperial politics. The faith that emerges from this crisis is both strengthened and complicated by its very success. Hezekiah's illness and Babylon's shadow. The king lies dying. Hezekiah, who faced down the Assyrian war machine, now battles an enemy no sword can defeat. The illness creeps through his body like poison. Boils cover his skin. Fever burns in his blood. The physicians shake their heads. There is no remedy in their knowledge. Isaiah comes to the palace with words harder than any siege engine. Set your house in order, the prophet declares, for you shall die and not live. The message carries no comfort, no hope of recovery, only the stark finality of approaching death. The man who trusted God against impossible odds now faces the one impossibility even faith cannot seem to overcome. But Hezekiah turns his face to the wall and weeps. His prayer rises like incense mixed with tears. Remember now, O Lord, how I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart, and have done what is good in your sight. The king who removed the high places, who destroyed the bronze serpent, who restored proper worship, now pleads his case before the divine court. Something shifts in the heavenly places. Before Isaiah can leave the palace courtyard, the word of the Lord comes to him again. Turn back and say to Hezekiah, "Thus says the Lord, the God of David your father, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears. Behold, I will heal you." The sign that follows defies nature itself. The shadow on the sundial moves backward 10 degrees. Time itself seems to bend to accommodate divine mercy. What was destined becomes undone. What seemed final proves changeable. Hezekiah receives 15 additional years of life, a gift that will reshape the future in ways no one can foresee. The healing comes through surprisingly ordinary means. Isaiah instructs the servants to take a lump of figs and lay it on the boil. The natural remedy works, but everyone understands the true source of recovery. The God who controls empires also governs the movements of shadows and the healing properties of simple fruit. During these added years of life, visitors arrive from a distant land. The delegation from Babylon comes bearing gifts and letters of congratulation on Hezekiah's recovery. Merodach-Baladan, the ambitious Babylonian ruler, seeks allies against their common Assyrian enemy. The gifts are magnificent. The diplomatic overtures seem promising. The king of Judah, perhaps still flush with his recent victories and miraculous healing, welcomes them warmly. More than hospitality motivates Hezekiah's response. He opens his treasures to these foreign visitors. The storehouses of silver and gold, the precious spices and oils, the armory with its weapons and shields. Everything valuable in his kingdom passes before Babylonian eyes. The king displays his wealth with the pride of a man who has overcome impossible odds. Isaiah learns of this display and arrives at the palace with questions that cut like knives. What did these men say, and where did they come from? When Hezekiah explains their Babylonian origin and admits showing them everything, the prophet's response chills the air like winter wind. Hear the word of the Lord, Isaiah declares. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, and some of your own sons who will come from you shall be taken away and shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. The prophecy cuts through celebration like a sword through silk. The very nation Hezekiah courts as an ally will become the instrument of Judah's destruction. The treasures displayed with such pride will fill Babylonian coffers. The royal line will serve foreign masters in distant palaces. The seeds of future catastrophe are sown in this moment of seeming triumph. Hezekiah's response reveals both wisdom and limitation. The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good, he says. But then he adds, for there will be peace and security in my days. The king accepts the prophecy but finds comfort in its delayed fulfillment. His own reign will remain prosperous. The consequences will fall on future generations. This response illuminates a profound tension in biblical faith. Divine justice operates on timescales that exceed individual lifespans. The choices of one generation echo through the decisions of their children and grandchildren. Hezekiah's diplomatic error will not bear full fruit for over a century, but its seeds are planted in this moment of misplaced pride. The Babylonian episode also reveals the complexity of international relations in the ancient Near East. Nations rise and fall, enemies become allies, allies become conquerors. The geopolitical landscape shifts like sand in the desert wind. What seems like clever diplomacy in one generation becomes the instrument of destruction in the next. Isaiah's prophetic insight penetrates these shifting alliances to see underlying patterns. The prophet who warned against trusting in Egyptian horses now warns against courting Babylonian friendship. Human alliances prove fragile. Political calculations become obsolete. Only the word of the Lord endures through changing circumstances. The irony runs deeper still. Hezekiah's extended life, granted through divine mercy, becomes the context for decisions that doom his kingdom. The gift of additional years creates the opportunity for mistakes that will echo through centuries. Even answered prayer carries unintended consequences when human wisdom fails to match divine generosity. Babylon's shadow thus falls across Jerusalem's future. The empire that will later carry away the temple treasures first enters Jewish consciousness through this diplomatic exchange. The exile that will reshape Jewish faith begins with a friendly visit and an unwise display of wealth. History pivots on moments that seem insignificant at the time. From judgment to comfort, enter 2nd Isaiah. Something shifts in chapter 40 like dawn breaking after the longest night. The voice that thundered judgment for 39 chapters suddenly speaks comfort. The God who promised exile now declares its end. The prophet who proclaimed desolation announces restoration. The tone changes so completely that scholars have wondered whether the same person could have written both sections. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her hard service has been completed, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. These opening words of the 40th chapter ring like bells after a funeral, proclaiming life where death seemed final. The historical context has transformed utterly. Jerusalem lies in ruins. The temple stands empty. The royal line sits in Babylonian courts. The people who once heard Isaiah's warnings about coming judgment now experience its harsh reality. Exile has become their daily bread. The promises of God seem as distant as the homeland they remember through tears. Into this broken world comes a new voice. Some call him 2nd Isaiah or Deutero-Isaiah. Whether the same prophet who once walked with Hezekiah or a spiritual successor carrying forward his legacy, this voice speaks to a different generation with different needs. Where the original Isaiah cried out against sin, this voice proclaims forgiveness. Where judgment once thundered, comfort now whispers. The literary style shifts as dramatically as the message. Gone are the harsh metaphors of divine anger. In their place flow images of tenderness. God becomes a shepherd gathering lambs, a mother comforting her children, a husband wooing back his beloved wife. The very vocabulary of divine human relationship undergoes transformation, yet continuity threads through the change. The Holy One of Israel remains the central character. The concern for justice continues. The vision of God's universal sovereignty expands rather than contracts. What changes is not the divine character, but the historical moment and its corresponding spiritual needs. The exile has accomplished something the original warnings could not. The people have experienced the consequences of breaking covenant. They have lived through the collapse of everything they considered permanent. The temple, the monarchy, the land itself have all been stripped away. In this wilderness of loss, they are ready to hear words they could not receive in prosperity. The voice that now speaks understands exile intimately. This is not comfort offered from a distance, but hope born from shared suffering. The prophet who speaks these words knows the taste of Babylonian bread, the sound of foreign languages, the ache of displacement. Comfort comes not from one who has avoided pain, but from one who has found God within it. Theological development marks this transition as clearly as historical circumstance. The God revealed in these chapters surpasses earlier understandings. Monotheism sharpens from practical loyalty to philosophical certainty. The Lord is not merely Israel's God above other gods, but the only God who exists. All other deities are mere products of human hands and imagination. This expanded vision of divine sovereignty creates space for unprecedented hope. If the Lord alone controls history, then Babylonian power is temporary. If Israel's God commands all nations, then exile need not be permanent. The theological insight that once explained judgment now grounds the promise of restoration. The voice of comfort also speaks with awareness of its audience's doubts. Exile has bred questions that prosperity never raised. How can God's people survive without their land? Can the covenant continue beyond the borders of the promised territory? Does divine love persist through the experience of divine judgment? These questions receive answers that would have seemed impossible in Isaiah's original context. The covenant proves portable, Divine presence transcends geographical boundaries. The relationship between God and people survives even the collapse of the institutions that once mediated it. Exile becomes not the end of the story, but a new chapter in ongoing relationship. The comfort offered here is not cheap consolation. It does not minimize the reality of suffering or pretend that pain does not matter. Instead, it locates current suffering within a larger narrative of divine purpose. The exile that seemed like abandonment becomes preparation. The judgment that felt like rejection becomes discipline. The experience of powerlessness creates readiness for a different kind of salvation. This voice also speaks to those who have never known anything but exile. Children born in Babylon have no memory of Jerusalem. Young adults have heard stories but never seen the temple. For them, comfort cannot mean return to a remembered past, but hope for an unimagined future. The promise must be large enough to encompass those who have no personal experience of what they have lost. The transition from judgment to comfort thus represents more than a change in prophetic message. It marks a theological revolution. The God who seemed contained within one nation's borders emerges as sovereign over all creation. The covenant that appeared to depend on particular places and practices proves adaptable to radically different circumstances. The hope that seemed buried under Babylonian rubble springs to life in forms no one anticipated. Cyrus, the Messiah? Politics gets weird. The word explodes across the ancient world like lightning splitting darkness. A Persian king named Cyrus has begun his march toward empire. From his mountain stronghold, he challenges the greatest powers of his age. Babylon trembles, Media falls. The established order cracks like pottery struck by stone. Into this chaos of shifting power comes perhaps the strangest prophecy in all of Scripture. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped to subdue nations before him. The Hebrew word for anointed is Mashiach, Messiah. A foreign king, a Persian ruler, a man who likely never heard the name of Israel's God, receives the title reserved for David's line. The theological implications stagger the mind. Isaiah speaks these words into a community of exiles struggling to understand their place in history. They have watched empires rise and fall around them. Assyria dominated their grandparents' generation. Babylon conquered their parents. Now this upstart Persian threatens to reshape the world again. Where is God's hand in these vast movements of power? The answer comes with shocking directness. The Lord of hosts orchestrates these imperial transitions for his own purposes. Cyrus advances not by his own strength, but as an instrument of divine will. The Persian king becomes God's weapon against Babylon, his tool for accomplishing purposes that transcend any single nation's interests. I call you by your name, I name you, though you do not know me. These words reveal the mystery of divine providence operating through unconscious agents. Cyrus pursues his own ambitions, builds his own empire, follows his own strategic calculations. Yet his decisions serve a purpose larger than his own understanding. He becomes God's Messiah without ever acknowledging God's existence. The historical Cyrus proves worthy of such cosmic significance. His military genius reshapes the ancient Near East. His administrative innovations create the largest empire the world has yet seen. His religious tolerance breaks with centuries of imperial practice. Where Assyrian and Babylonian kings destroyed local customs, Cyrus preserves them. Where other conquerors imposed their gods, he honors local deities. This policy of tolerance becomes the key to Jewish restoration. When Cyrus conquers Babylon in 539 BCE, he issues edicts allowing displaced peoples to return to their homelands. The famous Cyrus cylinder, discovered in the ruins of Babylon, proclaims his commitment to restoring local religious practices throughout his empire. What seems like enlightened policy serves divine purpose. The prophet sees through surface events to underlying patterns. Cyrus's rise represents more than political revolution. It signals God's commitment to his exiled people. The same divine power that brought judgment through Babylonian conquest now works restoration through Persian victory. History becomes the stage where divine purposes play out through human actors who rarely understand their roles. Yet the strangeness of calling Cyrus Messiah cannot be minimized. Traditional expectations centered messianic hope on David's descendants. The anointed one should emerge from Jewish lineage, understand Jewish law, advance Jewish interests. Instead, God's chosen deliverer comes from Persia, worships different gods, serves broader purposes than Jewish restoration alone. This theological shock forces a expansion of understanding. If God can use foreign kings as messiahs, then divine purpose operates on scales larger than ethnic boundaries. If Persian policy serves covenant promises, then the Lord's sovereignty extends beyond Israel's borders. The experience of exile has taught lessons that prosperity never could. The prophet's vision encompasses this broader perspective. He sees Cyrus's conquest as preparation for cosmic transformation. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know, from the rising of the sun and from the west, that there is none besides me. Through Persian victory, the world will learn monotheistic truth. Nations that never heard of Israel's God will witness his power. Peoples who worshipped local deities will encounter universal sovereignty. Cyrus becomes the unwitting missionary of Jewish faith to Gentile nations. The complexity deepens when considering Cyrus's own religious commitments. Persian religion honored Ahura Mazda as supreme deity. Zoroastrian influence emphasized cosmic struggle between light and darkness, good and evil. Cyrus himself may have understood his victories as service to Persian gods rather than acknowledgement of Israel's Lord. Yet the prophet claims divine credit for Persian success. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. The theological boldness astounds. Not only does God use foreign rulers, he takes responsibility for their actions. Persian military strategy becomes divine war plan. Cyrus's political calculations serve heavenly purposes. This raises profound questions about divine sovereignty and human responsibility. If God directs Cyrus's decisions, what freedom does the Persian king possess? If divine purpose operates through unconscious agents, how do we understand moral accountability? The prophet offers no systematic answers, only the bold assertion that God's purposes encompass all history. The practical implications for the exile community prove equally staggering. Their restoration will come not through their own strength, but through foreign intervention. Their return to Judah depends on Persian policy. Their temple reconstruction requires Gentile funding. The very independence they lost to one empire will be restored by another. This pattern of dependence on foreign power establishes precedents that will echo through Jewish history. From Persian restoration through Greek conquest to Roman rule, the Jewish people will repeatedly find their fate determined by empires they cannot control. Learning to discern God's purposes within imperial politics becomes a survival skill. The Servant Songs. Suffering and Salvation. 4 songs emerge from the prophecy like jewels embedded in stone. They speak of a mysterious figure called the Servant of the Lord. His identity remains hidden behind veils of poetry. His mission unfolds through images of suffering and glory. His significance echoes through centuries of interpretation, debate, and worship. The first song introduces him gently. Behold my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. The servant appears as God's chosen instrument, equipped with divine spirit, commissioned for global ministry. Yet his methods subvert every expectation of power. He will not cry aloud or lift his voice in the streets. His revolution comes through whispers rather than shouts. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. The servant's gentleness becomes his defining characteristic. Where others see weakness, he finds worth. Where others abandon hope, he tends flickering flame. His mission targets the wounded, the forgotten, the discarded remnants of humanity. Justice drives his work, but justice transformed by mercy. He brings forth justice to the nations, not through conquest, but through patient persistence. His light reaches Gentiles not through forced conversion, but through attractive example. The coastlands wait for his teaching because his message offers hope rather than condemnation. The second song reveals inner struggle. The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother, he named my name. The servant speaks in first person now, sharing his sense of divine calling and personal cost. His mouth has been made like a sharp sword, his body like a polished arrow. He is a weapon in God's hand, but a weapon that suffers from its own effectiveness. Discouragement marks his early ministry. I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing in vanity. The servant experiences what every prophet knows: the gap between divine commission and human response. His message falls on deaf ears. His efforts seem wasted. His mission appears to fail. Yet divine reassurance comes. It is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. The servant's apparent failure becomes the launching point for expanded mission. What seemed like limitation reveals itself as preparation. The third song introduces violence. I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. The servant who began in gentleness now endures brutal opposition. His message of justice provokes fierce resistance. His embodiment of divine love triggers human hatred. Physical abuse escalates to public humiliation. The servant becomes a target for every form of cruelty human imagination can devise. Yet he does not retaliate. He does not defend himself. He accepts suffering as part of his mission rather than evidence of its failure. The Lord God helps me, therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like a flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame. The servant's confidence rests not in his own strength, but in divine vindication. He trusts that God will ultimately justify his methods and validate his message. The fourth song reaches depths that still challenge comprehension. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. The servant's suffering becomes vicarious. He bears griefs that are not his own. He carries sorrows that belong to others. His pain serves purposes beyond his personal experience. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. The theological revolution explodes across traditional understanding. Suffering serves redemptive purpose. Pain becomes healing power. Death transforms into life-giving force. The mechanism defies explanation. How can one person's suffering atone for another's guilt? How does individual pain create communal healing? How can death produce life? The song offers images rather than systematic theology, poetry rather than philosophical proof. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. The universal scope of human need meets the particular focus of divine solution. Everyone has wandered. Everyone needs rescue. But the rescue comes through one who embodies perfect faithfulness. The servant's response to suffering reveals his character. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Violence meets nonviolence. Hatred encounters love. Injustice faces perfect submission. Even death cannot contain the servant's mission. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Somehow, through some divine mystery, death becomes birth, ending becomes beginning. Sacrifice produces abundance. The identity question haunts these songs. Who is this servant? Israel as a nation experiences exile and suffering. Yet the servant sometimes seems distinct from Israel, ministering to Israel rather than embodying it. Individual prophets suffer for their message, yet no single prophet encompasses the cosmic scope described here. Jewish interpretation has traditionally seen the nation itself in these passages. Israel's suffering among the nations serves God's larger purposes. Their exile and persecution become means of bringing divine light to Gentile darkness. Their faithfulness under pressure demonstrates the reality of their God. Christian interpretation finds Jesus in these songs. His life of compassion, his rejection by religious leaders, his crucifixion and resurrection appear to fulfill the pattern perfectly. The one who called himself gentle and lowly matches the servant's character. The one who died for others embodies vicarious suffering. Both interpretations grasp essential truth. The mystery of redemptive suffering operates through communities and individuals, through historical processes and personal sacrifice. The servant songs speak to any who bear pain for others' benefit, who suffer injustice for justice's sake, who die that others might live. Deutero-Isaiah's radical theology. The exile has become a theological laboratory. Everything Israel thought they knew about God has been tested by the fires of displacement. Traditional assumptions lie in ashes alongside the temple ruins. From this devastation emerges a vision of divine reality more radical than anything the ancient world has imagined. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. The declaration cuts through centuries of religious assumption like a sword through silk. This is not the familiar claim that Israel's God is stronger than other gods, more worthy of worship than competing deities. This is the revolutionary assertion that no other gods exist at all. The theological journey to this conclusion has been carved by suffering. As long as Israel prospered in their land, they could imagine their God as the best among many, their covenant as the most favorable among various divine human relationships. Exile has stripped away such comfortable pluralism. If other gods were real, why could they not protect their peoples from destruction? If divine power was shared among many, why do empires rise and fall according to predictable patterns? Experience has become the harsh teacher of monotheistic truth. The gods of Assyria could not preserve their empire. The deities of Babylon cannot secure their dominion. The divinities of conquered peoples offer no effective resistance to imperial expansion. Only one power seems to operate consistently through the chaos of international politics. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. The claim extends beyond existence to activity. Not only is the Lord the sole deity, he is the sole agent of historical causation. Nothing happens without his permission. No power operates outside his control. All events, pleasant and painful, flow from his sovereign will. This theological vision requires intellectual courage that takes breath away. It would be easier to blame evil on competing divine forces, to explain suffering through cosmic warfare between light and darkness. Instead, 2nd Isaiah traces all reality back to one source. God becomes responsible not only for blessing, but for judgment, not only for creation, but for destruction. The implications ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. If the Lord alone exists, then idol worship is not just misguided, but completely delusional. The craftsman who carves a god from wood deceives himself about reality's basic structure. The worshiper who bows before metal images addresses nothing more substantial than human imagination. The smith makes an axe and works in the coals. He shapes it with hammers and works it with his strong arm. He becomes hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. He shapes it with planes and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man with the beauty of a man to dwell in a house. The prophet's satire cuts deep into religious practice throughout the ancient world. The same piece of wood that warms a fire and bakes bread becomes material for divine statues. The craftsman who grows tired making his god claims to worship one who never wearies. The creation of human hands receives honor that belongs to the creator of human beings. Yet the mockery contains profound sadness. These elaborate religious systems represent humanity's deepest spiritual longings. The careful rituals, beautiful temples, and sincere prayers flow from authentic need for divine connection. The tragedy lies not in the longing, but in its misdirection toward objects that cannot respond. Monotheism transforms more than religious practice. It reshapes understanding of history itself. If the Lord alone controls events, then imperial politics serve divine purposes. Cyrus conquers Babylon not through superior strategy, but through heavenly commission. The exile of Judah serves cosmic purposes beyond punishment for covenant violations. This perspective creates space for unprecedented hope. If human empires rise and fall according to divine plan, then current suffering is not permanent. If the same God who sent Israel into exile can bring them home, then present circumstances need not determine future possibilities. The theological revolution becomes the foundation for prophetic promise. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Divine transcendence extends beyond existence to understanding. God's perspective encompasses realities that human minds cannot grasp. His purposes operate on scales that exceed human comprehension. This creates both comfort and challenge. Comfort flows from knowing that apparent chaos serves larger purposes. When individual suffering seems meaningless, when national disaster appears random, when historical processes seem to favor injustice, faith can rest in divine wisdom that sees connections invisible to human observation. Challenge emerges from the demand for trust without full understanding. If God's ways transcend human comprehension, then faith must learn to rest in character rather than explanation. Believers must trust divine goodness even when divine actions seem harsh. They must affirm divine justice even when immediate experience suggests otherwise. The exile community faces exactly this challenge. They have experienced the harsh side of divine sovereignty. Their temple lies in ruins because their God permitted its destruction. Their homeland remains empty because their Lord allows foreign occupation. Their current suffering flows directly from divine judgment on previous generations. Yet 2nd Isaiah calls them to trust the same God who sent them into exile to bring them home. The sovereign power that scattered them will gather them. The divine wisdom that permitted their suffering will transform their pain into purpose. The Lord who seemed absent will prove himself present in new ways. This theological revolution prepares the ground for everything that follows in biblical faith. Jewish confidence in divine sovereignty sustains them through centuries of powerlessness among the nations. Christian belief in God's ultimate control provides hope through persecution and suffering. Islamic submission to Allah's will draws strength from similar monotheistic conviction. The radical theology born in Babylonian exile thus becomes humanity's gift. The insight purchased through Jewish suffering enriches all who struggle to understand divine purpose within historical chaos. The faith forged in deportation's fire lights the way for every generation seeking God's presence in their own experience of loss. The return from Babylon, between prophecy and reality. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you that have no money, come, buy and eat. The invitation rings across the exile like music after silence. 2nd Isaiah's voice rises in triumphant call to homecoming. The time of punishment has ended. The period of separation concludes. Divine mercy opens the way to restoration. The prophet's vision soars with possibilities. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. And it shall be to the Lord for a memorial, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. Nature itself will celebrate their return. The wilderness between Babylon and Jerusalem will blossom like a garden. Rivers will flow in desert places. Highways will appear across desolate terrain. The very landscape will cooperate in this cosmic homecoming. Nothing will hinder their journey from exile to restoration. The reality proves more complex than the poetry suggested. When Cyrus issues his edict in 538 BCE, permitting displaced peoples to return to their homelands, the response among Jewish exiles is mixed. Some have established successful businesses in Babylon. Others have married into local families. Children born in exile know no other home. The call to return competes with the comfort of the familiar. Those who do respond face challenges the prophetic vision barely acknowledged. The journey itself stretches across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. Bandits threaten travelers, weather delays progress, supplies run short. The highways that seem guaranteed in prophecy must be carved from wilderness by human hands and protected by human vigilance. The first returnees arrive in Jerusalem to find ruins more complete than memory had preserved. 50 years of abandonment have allowed nature to reclaim much of the city. Wild growth covers former streets. Stones from collapsed buildings lie scattered like broken teeth. The Temple Mount stands empty, its sacred precincts defiled by debris and neglect. Rebuilding begins with foundations rather than festivals. The practical work of restoration lacks the cosmic drama that prophecy had suggested. Clearing rubble requires strong backs rather than divine intervention. Constructing new buildings demands skilled craftsmen rather than miraculous provision. The glory that was supposed to return with them remains frustratingly absent from their daily experience. Economic realities complicate spiritual expectations. The returnees possess limited resources for their ambitious rebuilding projects. Local populations who have occupied the land during the exile years view the newcomers with suspicion and sometimes hostility. Competition for scarce resources creates tensions that prophecy had not anticipated. The temple reconstruction becomes a symbol of both hope and frustration. When the foundation is laid, those old enough to remember Solomon's temple weep at the contrast. What once had seemed magnificent now appears modest by comparison. The new structure lacks the gold, silver, and precious materials that had adorned the original building. Yet celebration mingles with disappointment. Many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. The return reveals the gap between prophetic promise and historical process. Divine purposes operate through human instruments who remain limited by material constraints and political realities. The restoration that seemed guaranteed in vision must be worked out through decades of patient labor and gradual progress. Opposition emerges from unexpected quarters. The Samaritans, descendants of populations left behind during the Northern Kingdom's exile, offer to help with temple construction. When their assistance is refused, they become active opponents of the project. What should have been cooperation between related peoples becomes a source of lasting division. Persian policy proves both helpful and limiting. While Cyrus and his successors generally support the return of displaced populations, they also expect their provinces to remain peaceful and profitable. Jewish aspirations for complete independence must accommodate imperial expectations of continued loyalty and tribute payment. The prophetic vision of universal recognition also encounters resistance from reality. Neighboring nations do not flock to Jerusalem seeking divine wisdom. Foreign kings do not acknowledge Israel's God as supreme. The cosmic transformation that prophecy had promised remains largely invisible to outside observers. Yet seeds of fulfillment take root in unexpected soil. Those who do return carry with them a purified faith shaped by exile experience. The temptation toward idolatry, which had plagued previous generations, largely disappears from post-exilic Jewish communities. Monotheism, sharpened by suffering, becomes the bedrock of restored religious practice. The study of Scripture assumes new importance among the returnees. The words that had sustained them through exile continue to guide them through restoration. Ezra the scribe becomes as significant a figure as Zerubbabel the governor. Spiritual reconstruction proves as crucial as physical rebuilding. Intermarriage with local populations creates identity crises that force deeper reflection on what it means to be God's chosen people. Are ethnic boundaries essential to covenant relationship? Can Gentiles become full participants in Jewish community? These questions, barely visible in pre-exilic texts, become urgent concerns for the restoration generation. The modest success of the return also serves divine purposes that extend beyond Jewish restoration itself. The presence of a Jewish community in Jerusalem preserves biblical traditions through centuries of imperial change. The temple, however humble compared to Solomon's, provides a center for worship that maintains covenant faith through Greek, Roman, and Byzantine periods. The very disappointments of restoration contribute to evolving religious understanding. When earthly kingdoms fail to match prophetic visions, hope begins to look beyond history to divine intervention that transcends human limitations. The seeds of apocalyptic expectation grow in soil prepared by the gap between promise and performance. The Persian period becomes a time of theological maturation. The community that returns from Babylon carries monotheistic convictions tested by exile and tempered by the challenges of restoration. Their faith lacks the naive confidence of pre-exilic religion, but possesses depths that earlier generations had not explored. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. The invitation echoes through restored Jerusalem with new meaning. The God they seek has proved faithful through judgment and restoration alike. The one they call upon has demonstrated power to work through imperial politics and human limitations to accomplish divine purposes. The return from Babylon thus becomes not the end of the story, but a new chapter in ongoing relationship between God and people. The restoration that seemed final in prophetic vision reveals itself as one movement in a larger symphony of divine purpose that continues to unfold through subsequent centuries of Jewish experience. Trito Isaiah, after the return. The honeymoon is over. Decades have passed since the first exiles returned from Babylon with hearts full of hope and hands ready for rebuilding. The temple stands complete, though modest compared to Solomon's glory. The walls of Jerusalem rise again from ancient foundations, yet something is missing from the restoration. The transformation promised in prophetic vision remains stubbornly absent from daily reality. A new voice emerges in these post-exilic decades. Whether the same prophet who spoke comfort to the exiles or a successor carrying forward his spiritual legacy, this third Isaiah addresses a community struggling with the gap between expectation and experience. The cosmic transformation has not materialized. The Gentile pilgrimage to Jerusalem remains largely metaphorical. Divine glory appears more often in memory than in present experience. The problems that plagued pre-exilic Judah begin to resurface in new forms. Social inequality divides the restored community. Religious corruption creeps into temple worship. Political leaders pursue their own interests rather than community welfare. The sins that brought divine judgment in the first place threaten to undermine the restoration itself. Your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. The diagnosis echoes themes from earlier prophetic preaching. Human behavior still determines divine response. Covenant relationship still requires moral faithfulness. The return from Babylon has not changed these fundamental spiritual realities, yet this third voice speaks with awareness of all that has transpired. The community addressed has experienced both judgment and restoration. They have lived through exile and return. They know both divine wrath and divine mercy from personal experience. This shared history creates new possibilities for understanding and response. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. The transcendence theme from 2nd Isaiah continues, but with different application. Divine purposes operate on timescales that exceed individual lifespans. The restoration generation must trust that their current struggles serve larger purposes not yet visible. The vision of ultimate transformation expands rather than contracts in response to present disappointment. If the immediate return has not produced the cosmic renewal that prophecy promised, then fulfillment must await a more distant future. Hope stretches beyond current circumstances to embrace possibilities that exceed present imagination. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. The scope of divine promise enlarges to cosmic proportions. Not just the restoration of Jerusalem, not merely the return of exiles, but the complete renovation of reality itself becomes the ultimate prophetic vision. This expansion reflects hard-won wisdom about the relationship between divine promise and historical process. Prophetic fulfillment rarely matches exact expectations. Divine purposes work through human instruments that remain limited by finite resources and fallen nature. Ultimate transformation requires divine intervention that transcends ordinary historical processes. The community addressed by 3rd Isaiah lives in the tension between memory and hope. They remember the glorious promises that sustained them through exile. They hope for complete fulfillment in some future divine intervention. They struggle to maintain faith during the long waiting period between promise and performance. Religious practice becomes both refuge and problem during this extended interim. Temple worship provides continuity with ancient traditions and structure for community life. Yet ritual can become substitute for righteousness. Ceremony can replace authentic relationship with God. The very institutions meant to preserve faith risk becoming barriers to spiritual reality. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. The critique of empty religion echoes through all periods of biblical history. Divine preference consistently favors justice over ceremony, mercy over ritual precision. The economic disparities that divide the restored community provoke particular prophetic concern. Some returnees have prospered through trade connections or favorable Persian policies. Others struggle with subsistence farming on marginal land. The gap between rich and poor widens as the community establishes itself in the restored homeland. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Social justice emerges as the authentic expression of religious devotion. Caring for the vulnerable becomes more important than ceremonial observance. The community that has experienced displacement and poverty is called to remember their own suffering in their treatment of others who lack security and resources. The inclusion of foreigners creates both opportunity and tension within the restored community. Persian policy encourages religious tolerance, allowing Gentiles to participate in Jewish worship if they choose. Yet, questions arise about the boundaries of covenant community. How much inclusion can the chosen people embrace while maintaining their distinct identity? Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, "The Lord will surely separate me from his people," and let not the eunuch say, "Behold, I am a dry tree." The prophetic voice advocates for radical inclusion that would have seemed impossible in pre-exilic periods. Divine love extends beyond ethnic boundaries to encompass all who seek genuine relationship with God. This inclusive vision builds on insights developed during the exile period. If God's sovereignty extends over all nations, then divine love can embrace people from every nation. If Persian kings can serve divine purposes, then Persian subjects can join divine community. The boundaries that once seemed essential to covenant faithfulness prove more flexible than earlier generations had imagined. Yet inclusion brings complications. Different cultural backgrounds create tensions within worship practices. Varying levels of commitment to Jewish law strain community cohesion. The very diversity that enriches the community also challenges its unity and shared identity. The prophetic response advocates for unity based on shared commitment rather than ethnic homogeneity. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The temple becomes a gathering place for anyone who seeks genuine relationship with God, regardless of their cultural or racial background. This vision extends the logic of monotheism to its natural conclusion. If there is only one God, then all people are potential members of one community. If divine love transcends national boundaries, then human fellowship should mirror divine inclusiveness. The restoration of Jerusalem becomes the preparation for cosmic gathering that includes all nations, foreigners, eunuchs, and the outcast redeemed. The gates swing wider than anyone expected. Throughout Israel's history, rigid boundaries had defined who could approach the holy places. Foreigners remained outside the covenant community. Eunuchs were excluded from the assembly. Physical defects barred people from temple service. Ethnic purity determined religious standing. But now a voice speaks that shatters every barrier. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, "The Lord will surely separate me from his people." And let not the eunuch say, "Behold, I am a dry tree." The prophet addresses those who have been systematically excluded from religious community. Their very concerns reveal how deeply marginalization has affected their understanding of divine love. The foreign converts worry about permanent separation. They have witnessed how ethnic boundaries shape community membership. They know the stories of Moabites and Ammonites being banned from the assembly. They understand that their non-Jewish heritage marks them as outsiders in the eyes of many community members. Eunuchs face different but equally painful exclusion. Whether they became eunuchs through military conquest, royal court service, or other circumstances beyond their control, their physical condition bars them from full participation in religious life. Ancient law declares that no one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Into this landscape of exclusion comes divine promise that revolutionizes religious understanding. For thus says the Lord, "To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me and hold fast my covenant, I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off." The reversal stuns with its completeness. Those who cannot have biological children receive eternal memorial. Those excluded from the assembly gain places of honor within God's house. Those marked by physical difference find spiritual distinction. The very conditions that seem to disqualify them become occasions for divine grace. Foreign converts receive similar reassurance, and the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, and everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it, and holds fast my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. The requirements for inclusion focus on spiritual commitment rather than ethnic identity. Keeping Sabbath, maintaining covenant faithfulness, and loving God's name become the criteria that matter. Cultural background becomes irrelevant compared to authentic devotion. The heart's orientation toward God outweighs the accident of birth nationality. This transformation reflects insights gained through exile experience. The Jewish community has learned what it means to be foreigners in a strange land. They have experienced exclusion, marginalization, and cultural displacement. Their own suffering has created empathy for others who face similar rejection. The Persian imperial context also shapes this inclusive vision. Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance creates space for unprecedented diversity within local communities. The Jewish restoration occurs within a broader framework that encourages cultural exchange and religious experimentation. Imperial breadth enables prophetic imagination. Yet, the inclusion proclaimed here exceeds mere political tolerance. This is theological revolution that traces back to divine character itself. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The temple that once represented exclusive covenant relationship now becomes a gathering place for universal worship. The phrase all peoples carries explosive implications. Not just converted foreigners, not merely those who fully embrace Jewish law, but representatives from every nation on earth. The restoration of Jerusalem serves purposes larger than Jewish welfare alone. It creates a center for global spiritual pilgrimage. This vision builds logically on the monotheistic insights developed during exile. If there is only one God, then all people are potentially his worshipers. If divine sovereignty extends over every nation, then divine love can embrace people from every culture. The Lord who controls Persian kings can welcome Persian subjects into covenant community. The practical implications challenge every aspect of traditional religious practice. Temple worship must accommodate different languages, customs, and cultural expressions. Community leadership must include people with varying backgrounds and experiences. Religious education must address questions that arise from cultural diversity. Opposition emerges predictably from those who benefit from exclusive arrangements. Established families worry about losing status if outsiders gain equal standing. Religious professionals fear their expertise becoming less valuable if community membership expands dramatically. Economic interests align with theological conservatism to resist inclusive change. The prophet anticipates such resistance and addresses it directly. Thus says the Lord God, who gathers the outcasts of Israel, I will gather yet others to him besides those already gathered. Divine intention moves consistently toward inclusion rather than exclusion. God's nature tends toward gathering rather than scattering. The language of outcasts proves particularly significant. It acknowledges that exclusion has been practiced even within the covenant community itself. Some Israelites have been marginalized by others. Some members of the chosen people have experienced rejection from their own religious institutions. Divine gathering includes these internal outcasts alongside foreign converts. This pattern of exclusion and inclusion becomes a recurring theme in biblical history. Religious communities consistently create barriers that God consistently challenges. Human tendencies toward distinction and separation encounter divine preferences for unity and embrace. The tension between these impulses shapes spiritual development across generations. The eunuchs and foreigners addressed in this passage represent all who have been told they do not belong. Their stories echo through every generation in the experiences of those who find themselves excluded from religious communities for reasons beyond their control. Their divine welcome offers hope to every subsequent generation of outcasts. The memorial promised to eunuchs proves especially poignant. Unable to have biological children who might preserve their names, they receive eternal remembrance in God's house. Their legacy transcends physical reproduction through spiritual reproduction. Their influence spreads through those they serve rather than those they beget. This promise establishes principles that extend far beyond the specific historical circumstances. Divine evaluation focuses on character rather than external conditions. Spiritual fruitfulness surpasses physical fertility. Service to others creates more lasting legacy than personal achievement. The values that matter to God often invert the priorities that shape human societies. The foreigner's inclusion also breaks ground for developments that will reshape religious history. Their welcome prepares the way for Gentile inclusion in early Christianity. Their acceptance establishes precedents for Islamic expansion beyond Arab boundaries. Their stories become templates for every subsequent movement of religious inclusion. Fast that I desire. Justice as worship. The people gather for prayer, their faces drawn with hunger. They have fasted for days, denying themselves food and comfort in hopes of gaining divine attention. Their religious observance appears exemplary. Their devotion seems genuine, yet their prayers bounce back from heaven like stones thrown against walls. God remains silent. Their fasting fails to achieve its intended purpose. Why have we fasted and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? Their complaint carries the frustration of sincere religious effort that produces no spiritual result. They have followed the prescribed rituals. They have undertaken the recommended disciplines. They have done what previous generations understood as proper worship. The divine response cuts through their religious assumptions like lightning through darkness. Behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. The problem lies not in their religious technique, but in their social behavior. They fast while exploiting their employees. They pray while practicing injustice. They seek God's favor while denying mercy to those under their authority. Their worship serves to mask rather than express authentic relationship with divine holiness. The contradiction reveals itself most clearly in the economic sphere. Business continues as usual during their religious observances. Workers still labor under oppressive conditions. Fair wages remain unpaid. The fast that was supposed to demonstrate solidarity with human suffering actually perpetuates the systems that create such suffering. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Divine preference emerges with stark clarity. God desires social transformation rather than religious performance. Justice matters more than ceremony. Liberation takes priority over liturgy. The list of divine requirements continues with practical specificity. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Each item addresses concrete human need rather than abstract spiritual discipline. Sharing bread with the hungry requires personal sacrifice of resources. Bringing homeless people into one's house demands physical space and emotional energy. Clothing the naked costs money and attention. Not hiding from family members in need requires ongoing relationship maintenance. Every requirement involves material cost rather than mere religious sentiment. The prophetic vision transforms fasting from individual spiritual discipline into community social action. Instead of each person denying themselves food, the community ensures that everyone has adequate nutrition. Instead of temporary personal discomfort, lasting structural change addresses systemic problems that create unnecessary suffering. This redefinition of worship reflects insights that run throughout biblical revelation. Divine holiness expresses itself through justice and mercy rather than ritual precision. God's character reveals itself in how communities treat their most vulnerable members rather than how they perform their religious ceremonies. The promise attached to authentic worship proves as compelling as the requirements themselves. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Divine blessing flows naturally from justice-centered worship. Light imagery suggests illumination that spreads beyond individual experience to enlighten entire communities. The dawn comparison implies gradual but inevitable brightening that affects everyone within its scope. Healing language points toward restoration of relationships broken by injustice and oppression. The reference to righteousness going before them evokes military imagery. Justice becomes the advance guard that clears the path for divine blessing. When communities practice fairness and mercy, they create conditions that invite rather than repel divine presence. Their social behavior determines their spiritual experience. Divine protection serves as rear guard in this imagery. The community that practices justice receives divine covering from attacks that might otherwise overwhelm them. Their commitment to social righteousness creates security that military force cannot provide. Justice becomes both the path to blessing and the means of protection. The transformation extends beyond immediate community to affect relationship with God Himself. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and He will say, "Here I am." Prayer that seemed to bounce back from closed heaven now receives immediate divine response. Communication breakdown caused by social injustice finds healing through social reform. The conditional nature of these promises proves crucial. Divine response depends on human behavior rather than being automatically guaranteed. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger, and speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. Taking away the yoke involves dismantling oppressive systems that burden community members unnecessarily. Stopping the pointing finger requires ending blame and condemnation that divide rather than unite people. Ceasing wicked speech demands positive communication that builds rather than destroys relationships. Pouring oneself out for hungry people implies generous self-sacrifice that goes beyond token charity. Satisfying the desire of afflicted persons suggests comprehensive care that addresses root causes rather than merely symptoms. The requirements demand fundamental reorientation of priorities and resources. The promise of light rising in darkness speaks to communities struggling with problems that seem insoluble. When social justice becomes the foundation of worship, illumination comes that reveals solutions previously invisible. The gloom that settles over unjust societies lifts when mercy and fairness take root. This passage becomes foundational for understanding authentic worship throughout biblical tradition. Jewish interpretation emphasizes the connection between ritual observance and ethical behavior. Christian reading finds echoes in Jesus' teaching about loving neighbor as oneself. Islamic application connects worship of Allah with care for orphans and widows. The prophetic insight transcends particular religious boundaries to address universal human tendencies. Every religious community faces temptation to substitute ceremony for justice, ritual for righteousness. Every generation must rediscover that divine approval depends more on how people treat each other than on how they perform their religious duties. Contemporary application proves as relevant as ancient context. Communities that practice elaborate worship while tolerating systemic injustice find their prayers ineffective. Religious institutions that prioritize internal programs while ignoring community needs discover their influence diminishing. The principle remains constant across centuries and cultures. The fast that God desires ultimately transforms both those who practice it and those who benefit from it. Justice-centered worship creates communities where human dignity is protected, where resources are shared fairly, where the vulnerable receive care and protection. Such communities become visible demonstrations of divine character in human society. The glorious future, new heavens and new earth. The words arrive like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. Beyond the rubble of Jerusalem, beyond the tears of exile, Isaiah's vision soars into realms that stretch the very fabric of imagination. These final chapters carry the weight of cosmic transformation. More than restoration, this prophecy speaks of complete renewal. The prophet sees creation itself reborn. Former troubles dissolve like morning mist. The sound of weeping fades into silence. Death becomes a stranger to the land. At first glance, this appears to be poetry born from desperation. The returned exiles faced harsh realities. Their rebuilt temple stood smaller than Solomon's glory. Their numbers remained few, their enemies pressed close. Therefore, some scholars suggest these visions emerged from deep disappointment with earthly circumstances. But the text reveals something far more profound. These chapters don't merely respond to political failure, they reimagine the very structure of reality. The prophet declares that old categories no longer apply. Heaven and earth merge into one dwelling place. The imagery builds like a symphony reaching its crescendo. Nations flow toward Jerusalem like rivers converging. Kings bow before Zion's light. The wealth of distant lands arrives on ships and camels. Gold and frankincense pour through the city gates. Light replaces all other illumination. The sun shall no longer be your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give light to you by night. Instead, eternal radiance flows from the divine presence itself. Darkness becomes impossible. Night disappears from the calendar of time. Violence ends its reign over human affairs. The wolf feeds beside the lamb. The lion grazes on straw like cattle. Children play safely near the dens of serpents. No creature harms another throughout the holy mountain. Death itself faces defeat. There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days. Lives extend beyond normal measure. A person who reaches 100 years seems barely mature. Premature death becomes unknown. The social order transforms completely. Every person enjoys the fruit of their own labor. No one builds houses for others to inhabit. No one plants vineyards for strangers to harvest. Work becomes meaningful. Justice becomes perfect. Oppression vanishes from memory. These visions echo throughout later religious thought. Early Christians saw glimpses of their hoped-for kingdom. Medieval mystics found maps for their spiritual journeys. Modern liberation theologians discovered blueprints for social transformation. The prophet's language deliberately blurs the line between spiritual and material reality. These promises encompass both individual souls and entire societies. Personal renewal and cosmic recreation happen simultaneously. The boundary between inner and outer transformation dissolves. Archaeological evidence suggests that post-exilic Judah struggled with poverty and limited resources. The Persian period brought stability but little prosperity. The community faced constant pressure from neighboring peoples who had settled in their absence. Against this backdrop, Isaiah's cosmic visions served a crucial purpose. They provided hope that transcended immediate circumstances. They reminded the struggling community that their small efforts participated in grander purposes. Their modest temple connected to eternal realities. The text presents these visions as certainty rather than possibility. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. The future becomes as fixed as the past. This confidence stems from Isaiah's understanding of divine character. The same power that spoke creation into existence can recreate it according to better patterns. The same love that rescued slaves from Egypt can rescue humanity from death itself. The final chapters weave together themes that run throughout the entire book. Justice and mercy dance together. Judgment and salvation embrace. Universal scope and particular care unite in perfect harmony. Modern readers often struggle with such expansive promises. Our scientific worldview makes cosmic transformation seem impossible. Our historical experience makes perfect justice seem naive. Therefore, many interpret these chapters as metaphor rather than prediction. Yet the prophet's vision continues to exercise powerful influence. Environmental movements draw inspiration from images of renewed creation. Social justice advocates find motivation in promises of perfect equity. Interfaith dialogue discovers common ground in shared hopes for universal peace. The literary artistry reaches its peak in these passages. Hebrew poetry employs every available device. Parallel structures create rhythmic beauty. Metaphors pile upon metaphors until meaning overflows normal containers. The very language strains to contain such vast possibilities. Contemporary scholarship recognizes these chapters as among the most influential in biblical literature. They shaped Jewish expectations about messianic ages. They influenced Christian doctrines about final resurrection. They provided vocabulary for Islamic descriptions of paradise. The vision concludes with an image that haunts the imagination. Fire burns continuously but never consumes. Worms feast endlessly but never finish their work. Those who rebelled against the divine face consequences that stretch beyond time's boundaries. This final contrast emphasizes the stakes involved in human choices. The new creation includes both ultimate blessing and ultimate warning. Freedom to choose remains intact even in the transformed cosmos. As these chapters close Isaiah's prophetic journey, they leave readers suspended between earth and heaven. The promise hangs in the air like incense rising from an altar. Whether metaphor or prediction, poetry or prophecy, these words continue to kindle hope in human hearts across the centuries. Isaiah and the Messianic Hope. Centuries after Isaiah's voice fell silent, his words began speaking in languages he never learned. Early followers of Jesus discovered prophecies they believed pointed directly to their teacher. Virgin births, suffering servants, and peaceful kingdoms suddenly carried new meaning. More than ancient history, Isaiah became a roadmap to divine redemption. The Gospel of Matthew opens this interpretive tradition with bold confidence. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. The Hebrew text of Isaiah uses the word alma, which means young woman. The Greek translation chose parthenos, meaning virgin. This single word choice would influence theology for millennia. Christian interpreters found Jesus throughout Isaiah's pages. The child born in chapter 9 became the Christ child. The suffering servant of chapter 53 became the crucified Savior. The conquering king of chapter 11 became the returning Lord. Each discovery reinforced their conviction that Isaiah had foreseen their Messiah centuries before his birth. At first glance, this interpretation might seem forced. Isaiah spoke to 8th century Judah about immediate political crises. His prophecies addressed Assyrian invasions and Babylonian exile. The historical context suggests more pressing concerns than distant messianic hopes. But the Christian reading reveals something deeper about prophetic literature. These texts often work on multiple levels simultaneously. Immediate political meanings coexist with broader spiritual applications. Historical fulfillment doesn't exhaust prophetic potential. The suffering servant passages became particularly crucial for Christian theology. Isaiah describes a figure who bears the sins of many. He faces rejection and violence. His wounds bring healing to others. His death accomplishes what his life could not achieve. Early Christians saw precise correspondence between these descriptions and Jesus' crucifixion. The servant's silence before accusers matched Jesus' behavior during trial. The servant's burial with the rich corresponded to Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. The servant's vindication after death pointed toward resurrection. This interpretation required careful exegetical work. Jewish tradition had generally understood the servant as representing Israel itself. The nation's suffering in exile atoned for its sins and brought blessing to other peoples. Collective rather than individual identity seemed more natural to the text. Christian theologians developed sophisticated arguments for messianic interpretation. They distinguished between corporate and individual applications. Israel's experience prefigured the Messiah's mission. The servant's identity could encompass both nation and person without contradiction. The virgin birth prophecy generated similar debate. Isaiah's original context involved King Ahaz and the Syro-Ephraimite crisis. A young woman would conceive and bear a son before the enemy kingdoms fell. This seemed to refer to events in Isaiah's own time rather than centuries in the future. Christian interpreters argued for deeper significance. God's signs often work through ordinary events to point toward extraordinary fulfillment. The near-term fulfillment provided the pattern for ultimate realization. Jesus' birth completed what earlier births had merely foreshadowed. Medieval Christian scholars developed elaborate systems of prophetic interpretation. They identified literal, moral, allegorical, and anagogical meanings within the same passages. Isaiah's text became a multi-layered treasure that yielded new discoveries with each reading. The peaceful kingdom passages received special attention during times of conflict. War-weary Christians found comfort in promises of universal peace. Social reformers drew inspiration from visions of perfect justice. Oppressed minorities discovered hope in prophecies about the downtrodden being lifted up. These interpretations shaped Christian worship and liturgy. Isaiah's words entered prayers and hymns. Advent seasons featured readings from chapters 7, 9, and 11. Easter celebrations drew from chapter 53's resurrection imagery. The Protestant Reformation brought new intensity to messianic interpretation. Reformers emphasized prophetic fulfillment as proof of biblical authority. They argued that precise correspondence between prophecy and fulfillment demonstrated divine inspiration of Scripture. Catholic scholars maintained that prophetic interpretation required church tradition alongside biblical text. Individual readers might miss crucial meanings without proper guidance. The community's centuries of reflection provided essential context for understanding messianic prophecies. Modern biblical scholarship approaches these questions with different methods. Historical critical analysis seeks to understand what texts meant in their original contexts. Literary criticism examines how language creates meaning across time periods. Theological reflection considers how ancient words speak to contemporary faith. Some scholars argue that Christian messianic interpretation reads later beliefs back into earlier texts. They suggest that Isaiah's prophecies address their own historical moment rather than distant future events. The messianic readings represent creative reinterpretation rather than original meaning. Others maintain that prophetic texts inherently point beyond their immediate circumstances. God's word spoken through Isaiah transcends its historical boundaries. Multiple fulfillments enrich rather than complicate prophetic significance. Archaeological discoveries continue to inform this debate. Dead Sea Scroll fragments reveal how Isaiah was interpreted in pre-Christian Jewish communities. Some passages already carried messianic associations before Jesus' birth. Christian interpretation built upon existing Jewish traditions. The messianic reading of Isaiah extends beyond Christianity. Some Jewish interpreters continue to find future messianic hope in these passages. Islamic tradition recognizes Jesus as Messiah, while understanding the role differently than Christian doctrine. Contemporary Christian theology wrestles with how to honor Isaiah's historical context while maintaining messianic interpretation. Many scholars embrace both dimensions simultaneously. Isaiah spoke meaningfully to his own generation, while his words also pointed toward ultimate fulfillment. This dual perspective enriches rather than diminishes Isaiah's significance. The prophet becomes both ancient political commentator and eternal voice of hope. His words address immediate crises while also speaking to humanity's deepest longings for redemption and renewal. Isaiah in Jewish thought. Long before Christians discovered Jesus in Isaiah's pages, Jewish teachers were wrestling with the prophet's meaning for their own community. Rabbis gathered around study tables, unrolling scrolls, debating every phrase. More than ancient history, Isaiah became a living voice that continued speaking to each generation's struggles and hopes. The Talmudic tradition preserves centuries of rabbinic reflection on Isaiah's prophecies. These discussions reveal how Jewish scholars understood the prophet's role in their ongoing story. Rather than focusing on individual messianic figures, they emphasized Isaiah's vision for the entire people of Israel. Rabbi Johanan taught that Isaiah saw further into the future than any other prophet. His visions encompassed not just immediate political crises, but the entire sweep of Jewish history. From Assyrian invasions through Roman destruction to ultimate restoration, Isaiah's prophecies provided a roadmap through centuries of exile and return. The suffering servant passages received particularly intense scrutiny. While Christians interpreted these as individual messianic prophecies, Jewish tradition generally understood the servant as collective Israel. The nation's sufferings throughout history served God's purposes for world redemption. Through persecution and exile, Jews brought monotheistic knowledge to all peoples. This interpretation carried profound implications for Jewish identity. Suffering became meaningful rather than merely tragic. Each generation's persecution participated in Isaiah's prophetic vision. Jewish pain served universal purposes that transcended immediate circumstances. The Babylonian Talmud records extensive debates about Isaiah's chronology. Some rabbis arranged his prophecies according to historical sequence. Others organized them by thematic content. These discussions reveal careful attention to the prophet's literary structure and theological development. Medieval Jewish philosophers found in Isaiah confirmation of rational monotheism. Maimonides cited Isaiah's vision of God's absolute unity as biblical support for philosophical theology. The prophet's denunciation of idolatry provided scriptural foundation for logical arguments against polytheism. Rashi, the great medieval commentator, developed detailed interpretations of Isaiah's more difficult passages. His comments balanced historical context with contemporary application. He showed how ancient prophecies continued to illuminate Jewish experience under Christian and Muslim rule. The Kabbalistic tradition discovered mystical meanings within Isaiah's words. Each prophecy contained hidden layers of spiritual significance. The numerical values of Hebrew letters revealed secret connections between earthly events and celestial realities. Isaiah became a guide to divine mysteries as well as historical events. Spanish Jewish scholars during the Golden Age found in Isaiah justification for their intellectual achievements. The prophet's vision of nations flowing toward Jerusalem suggested that Jewish wisdom would eventually enlighten all peoples. Their philosophical and scientific work participated in Isaiah's universal mission. The expulsion from Spain in 1492 brought new intensity to Isaiah's prophecies about exile and return. Rabbi Isaac Abravanel wrote extensive commentaries connecting Isaiah's words to contemporary Jewish experience. The ancient prophecies provided comfort and explanation for seemingly inexplicable suffering. Hasidic teachers discovered in Isaiah profound teachings about divine presence in the world. The prophet's vision of God's holiness filling the earth suggested that spiritual reality pervaded all existence. Even in exile, Jews could encounter the divine through proper devotion and study. The 18th century Jewish Enlightenment brought new approaches to Isaiah's interpretation. Moses Mendelssohn argued that Isaiah's ethical teachings represented universal human values rather than merely particularistic Jewish concerns. The prophet spoke to all humanity about justice and compassion. Modern Zionist movement found in Isaiah powerful support for return to the land. "Comfort, comfort my people" became a rallying cry for Jewish nationalism. The prophet's visions of Jerusalem's restoration inspired practical political action as well as spiritual hope. Theodor Herzl quoted Isaiah in his writings about the Jewish state. The prophecy that nations would flow toward Jerusalem suggested that a restored Jewish homeland would benefit all peoples. Zionism fulfilled Isaiah's universal vision through particular Jewish action. Archaeological discoveries in the land of Israel seem to confirm Isaiah's prophecies about return and rebuilding. Each excavation revealed connections between ancient promises and modern realities. The prophet's words provided both spiritual meaning and historical validation for Zionist enterprise. Holocaust survivors found in Isaiah both comfort and challenge. The suffering servant passages spoke to their experience of inexplicable persecution. But Isaiah's promises of ultimate restoration demanded continued faith despite overwhelming tragedy. Contemporary Jewish biblical scholarship approaches Isaiah with sophisticated historical and literary methods. These scholars seek to understand the prophet within his ancient Near Eastern context while maintaining reverence for his religious significance. Academic study enriches rather than replaces traditional interpretation. Reform Judaism emphasizes Isaiah's ethical teachings about social justice. The prophet's denunciation of empty ritual while demanding care for the poor provides scriptural foundation for liberal Jewish activism. Isaiah becomes a model for prophetic social criticism. Conservative Judaism maintains that Isaiah's prophecies retain future fulfillment alongside their historical meanings. The prophet spoke both to his own generation and to subsequent Jewish experience. Multiple layers of meaning enrich rather than contradict scriptural authority. Orthodox Judaism preserves traditional interpretations while incorporating modern scholarship where appropriate. Isaiah's prophecies about messianic restoration continue to shape expectations about ultimate redemption. The prophet's words remain living scripture rather than merely historical documents. Israeli society continues to wrestle with Isaiah's vision of universal peace emanating from Jerusalem. Some see the modern state as beginning fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Others argue that true prophetic fulfillment requires spiritual transformation beyond political achievement. The prophet's influence extends throughout Jewish liturgy and culture. Isaiah's words appear in prayer books, holiday celebrations, and life cycle ceremonies. His vision of divine holiness and human responsibility continues to shape Jewish identity across denominational boundaries. Contemporary Jewish teachers find in Isaiah resources for interfaith dialogue. The prophet's vision of all nations recognizing divine sovereignty provides common ground with other monotheistic traditions. Um, Isaiah becomes a bridge between particularistic Jewish identity and universal human concerns. Literary brilliance, the poetry of fire. Isaiah's words burn across the page like lightness. More than mere prophecy, these chapters showcase literary artistry that rivals any ancient text. The prophet wielded language like a master craftsman, forging images that sear themselves into memory. Hebrew poetry reaches its zenith in these passages. The opening verse sets the tone immediately. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth. The prophet summons the entire cosmos as witnesses. Heaven and earth become courtroom observers to divine proceedings. This bold opening establishes Isaiah's authority and the universal scope of his message. Parallelism dominates Isaiah's poetic structure. Hebrew poetry works through repetition and variation rather than rhyme and meter. Ideas echo and expand across successive lines. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Each phrase builds upon the previous one while adding new dimensions. The prophet's metaphors blaze with intensity. Israel becomes an unfaithful wife. Judah transforms into a diseased body. Jerusalem turns into a besieged city. These images carry emotional weight alongside their literal meanings. Readers feel the prophet's passion through carefully chosen comparisons. Isaiah's use of irony cuts like a sharpened blade. He describes people who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. The repetition emphasizes human arrogance, while the context reveals divine judgment. Apparent wisdom becomes obvious foolishness when measured against ultimate standards. The famous Vineyard song demonstrates Isaiah's narrative skill. He begins like a love ballad. Let me sing for my beloved, a song concerning his vineyard. Listeners expect romantic poetry. Instead, they discover a parable of judgment. The beloved becomes God, the vineyard becomes Israel, and the love song transforms into an indictment. This technique of delayed revelation appears throughout Isaiah's prophecies. He draws readers into seemingly familiar territory before revealing unexpected depths. Surface meanings give way to profound theological insights. Literary artistry serves prophetic purposes. The prophet's imagery draws from every aspect of human experience. Agricultural metaphors speak to farming communities. Military language addresses political realities. Domestic scenes connect with family life. Commercial references relate to economic concerns. Isaiah's vocabulary encompasses the full range of 8th century existence. At first glance, this breadth might seem unfocused, but the diversity serves deliberate purposes. Isaiah demonstrates that divine concern touches every sphere of life. No activity falls outside prophetic scrutiny. God's word addresses politics, economics, family relationships, and personal morality with equal intensity. The famous comfort passage in chapter 40 showcases Isaiah's gentler poetic voice. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. The repetition creates soothing rhythm. Harsh judgment gives way to compassionate restoration. The prophet's emotional range matches the situation's requirements. Hebrew wordplay enriches Isaiah's poetry beyond English translation's ability to capture. Names carry multiple meanings. Geographic locations suggest theological points. Sound patterns reinforce content meanings. Readers who understand Hebrew discover layers of significance invisible to translation. The prophet employs chiastic structures that create literary symmetry. Ideas appear in one order, then repeat in reverse sequence. This technique emphasizes central themes while creating satisfying artistic patterns. Form and content unite in perfect harmony. Isaiah's use of rhetorical questions engages readers directly. To whom then will you liken God? Forces personal reflection. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Demands intellectual humility. These questions transform passive reading into active participation. The text includes examples of nearly every Hebrew poetic device. Alliteration creates sound patterns that reinforce meaning. Assonance produces musical effects that aid memorization. Consonance binds related concepts through shared sounds. Isaiah masters the full range of poetic techniques. Scholars have identified sophisticated literary structures throughout the book. Some passages follow alphabetic patterns. Others employ numerical sequences. Many incorporate ancient Near Eastern treaty formulae. Isaiah adapts existing literary conventions while creating entirely new artistic effects. The prophet's emotional range spans from tender compassion to blazing anger. He can move readers to tears with images of divine love, then terrify them with descriptions of coming judgment. This emotional intensity serves prophetic purposes by making abstract theological concepts viscerally real. Isaiah's influence on later Hebrew literature cannot be overstated. Subsequent prophets borrowed his imagery and techniques. Psalmists echoed his theological themes. Wisdom writers adopted his educational methods. The entire Hebrew Bible shows traces of Isaiah's literary impact. Christian hymn writers have drawn extensively from Isaiah's poetic treasury. Holy, holy, holy comes directly from chapter 6. O come, Emmanuel builds on chapter 7's promise. Comfort ye my people quotes chapter 40. Isaiah's words continue to inspire musical expression. Modern Hebrew poetry shows continued influence from Isaiah's techniques. Israeli poets employ his metaphorical strategies and structural patterns. Contemporary religious literature draws from his theological vocabulary. The prophet's literary legacy remains vibrant in modern Hebrew culture. Biblical scholars recognize Isaiah as one of ancient literature's supreme artistic achievements. The combination of theological depth and poetic excellence creates texts that reward both devotional reading and academic study. Few ancient authors match Isaiah's ability to unite beauty and truth. Translation studies reveal the challenges involved in rendering Isaiah's poetry into other languages. Hebrew's compact structure allows multiple meanings within single phrases. Word order creates emphases impossible to duplicate in English. Sound patterns disappear entirely across linguistic boundaries. The prophet's literary brilliance serves his theological message rather than mere artistic display. Every metaphor advances his argument. Each structural pattern reinforces his themes. The poetry becomes prophetic vehicle rather than decorative addition. Contemporary readers who encounter Isaiah's original Hebrew often report transformative experiences. The text's artistic power combines with its spiritual content to create encounters that transcend normal reading experiences. Literary excellence becomes pathway to divine encounter. Was Isaiah one author? The authorship debate. Scholars sit in libraries around the world, comparing manuscripts, analyzing word patterns, and debating questions that would have baffled ancient readers. Did one prophet write all 66 chapters, or did multiple voices combine across centuries to create this prophetic masterpiece? More than academic curiosity, this question touches the heart of how Scripture develops and functions, the traditional view held firm for nearly 2 millennia. One prophet named Isaiah, son of Amoz, received divine visions during the 8th century BCE. He recorded prophecies spanning from his contemporary crises through distant future restoration. This unity seemed obvious to ancient and medieval readers who found consistent themes throughout the book. During the 18th century, European scholars began noticing peculiarities in the text. Chapter 40 marked a dramatic shift in tone and content. Earlier chapters focused on judgment against Judah and surrounding nations. Later chapters assumed Babylonian exile had already occurred and promised imminent return. Biblical criticism developed systematic methods for analyzing these differences. Scholars compared vocabulary patterns, theological emphases, historical references, and literary styles. Their research revealed distinctions that seemed too significant for single authorship. The breakthrough insight came from recognizing different historical backgrounds. Chapters 1 through 39 addressed 8th century Assyrian threats. Chapters 40 through 55 spoke to 6th century Babylonian exiles. The later chapters reflected post-exilic concerns about restoration and renewal. Critical scholars proposed a 3-part division. First, Isaiah encompassed chapters 1 through 39 and originated with the historical prophet during Assyrian period. Second, Isaiah included chapters 40 through 55 and emerged from anonymous exilic prophets in Babylon. Third, Isaiah covered chapters 56 through 66 and reflected post-exilic Palestinian concerns. This theory explained numerous textual features that single authorship struggled to address. The exile was presented as past event in later chapters. Cyrus of Persia was named specifically as God's anointed deliverer. Jerusalem's destruction was assumed rather than predicted. Theological vocabulary shifted significantly between sections. Traditional scholars responded with vigorous defenses of unified authorship. They argued that prophetic inspiration could provide knowledge of future events, including specific names like Cyrus. They found literary and theological connections linking all sections of the book. They suggested that apparent differences reflected changing circumstances rather than different authors. The debate intensified as archaeological discoveries provided additional context. Assyrian records confirmed the historical background of early chapters. Babylonian chronicles illuminated the exilic period described in middle sections. Persian documents verified details mentioned in later chapters. Modern scholarship has developed increasingly sophisticated analytical tools. Computer analysis can identify vocabulary patterns, syntactic preferences, and stylistic features with unprecedented precision. These methods generally support multiple authorship while revealing the complex literary processes involved in the book's composition. Some scholars propose even more complex theories of composition. They identify numerous editorial layers, redactional additions, and supplementary materials. The book becomes the product of extended scribal communities rather than individual prophetic authors. Conservative biblical scholars continue to defend essential unity while acknowledging compositional complexity. They argue that Isaiah's disciples preserved and expanded his original prophetic core. The book represents the school of Isaiah, rather than strictly individual authorship. Literary critics focus on the text's final form rather than its compositional history. They study how the current arrangement creates meaning, regardless of authorship questions. The book functions as unified literary work, whether written by one author or many. Canonical approaches emphasize the text's authoritative status within religious communities. The question of authorship becomes less important than the message's spiritual and theological significance. Multiple authors could speak with single prophetic voice under divine inspiration. Archaeological evidence continues to inform the debate. Inscriptions from Isaiah's period reveal linguistic patterns that match early chapters. Babylonian texts illuminate concepts found in middle sections. Post-exilic documents clarify references in later chapters. The discovery of Isaiah manuscripts among the Dead Sea Scrolls provided crucial evidence for textual transmission. The complete Isaiah scroll from Qumran shows that the entire book circulated as unified work by the 2nd century BCE. Ancient communities treated it as single prophetic collection. Comparative studies with other ancient Near Eastern literature reveal common patterns of prophetic compilation. Assyrian and Babylonian prophetic collections often combine materials from multiple periods and sources. The Isaiah pattern fits broader cultural practices of preserving prophetic traditions. Contemporary scholarship increasingly emphasizes the book's literary artistry, regardless of authorship questions. The final editors created sophisticated connections between different sections. Thematic patterns link beginning and end. Theological development spans the entire work. Some scholars propose compromise positions that honor both critical insights and traditional concerns. Isaiah of Jerusalem could have provided the prophetic foundation, while later inspired followers expanded his message for new historical circumstances. The book represents prophetic tradition rather than individual composition. The authorship debate reflects broader questions about biblical inspiration and authority. Does divine inspiration require single human authorship? Can multiple authors speak with unified prophetic voice? These theological questions transcend purely historical considerations. Religious communities continue to find spiritual meaning in Isaiah regardless of authorship conclusions. The text's power to inspire, comfort, and challenge remains constant, whether written by one prophet or many. Literary beauty and theological depth survive critical analysis. The debate illustrates the difference between ancient and modern approaches to literature. Ancient readers cared less about individual authorship than about authoritative content. Modern scholars emphasize historical processes and literary development. Both perspectives contribute valuable insights. Educational institutions must navigate between critical scholarship and religious tradition in teaching Isaiah. Many professors present multiple viewpoints, while encouraging students to engage seriously with both historical evidence and theological significance. The question remains open to continued research and reflection. New archaeological discoveries, improved analytical methods, and fresh theoretical approaches continue to inform scholarly discussion. The debate enriches rather than diminishes appreciation for this remarkable prophetic collection. Dead Sea Scrolls and ancient manuscripts. Hidden in caves for 2,000 years, scrolls waited in darkness until a Bedouin shepherd's wandering goat changed biblical scholarship forever. The year was 1947. The place was Qumran, near the shores of the Dead Sea. Among the ancient texts discovered in those limestone caverns, one manuscript stood apart, a complete scroll of Isaiah, older than any previously known biblical text. This great Isaiah scroll, measuring over 24 feet in length, became one of archaeology's most significant discoveries. Carbon dating placed its creation around 100 to 125 BCE, making it roughly 1,000 years older than the medieval manuscripts scholars had previously relied upon. More than ancient artifact, this scroll provided unprecedented insight into how Isaiah's prophecies were preserved and transmitted across centuries. The scroll's physical condition amazed researchers. Despite its age, most of the text remained clearly readable. Hebrew letters marched across 17 sheets of leather sewn together with linen thread. The ancient scribes had written with carbon-based ink that retained its dark clarity across millennia. Detailed comparison with modern biblical texts revealed remarkable accuracy in textual transmission. The Qumran Isaiah matched contemporary versions with only minor variations in spelling and word forms. This discovery shattered skeptical theories about wholesale corruption of biblical manuscripts during their copying history. The scroll contained numerous corrections and editorial marks that illuminated ancient scribal practices. Multiple hands had worked on the text, suggesting it passed through several scriptoria. Marginal notes indicated careful proofreading. Interlinear additions showed attempts to correct perceived errors. Some differences between the Qumran text and later manuscripts proved significant for understanding Isaiah's message. Variant readings offered alternative interpretations of difficult passages. Additional phrases provided expanded versions of familiar prophecies. These variations revealed the dynamic nature of textual transmission in antiquity. The discovery context provided crucial information about the scroll's provenance. Cave 1 at Qumran yielded 7 major manuscripts along with numerous fragments. The texts appeared to have been deliberately hidden during the 1st century CE, probably in response to Roman military threats against the local community. Archaeological investigation revealed that the Qumran site housed a religious community that maintained an extensive library. These sectarian Jews separated themselves from mainstream Palestinian Judaism while developing their own interpretations of biblical prophecy. Isaiah held special significance for their eschatological expectations. The community apparently viewed themselves as living in the last days prophesied by Isaiah. They interpreted the prophet's words about wilderness preparation as divine commands to establish their desert settlement. Isaiah's promises about remnant salvation justified their sectarian separation from corrupt Jerusalem. Multiple copies of Isaiah fragments found in other Qumran caves demonstrated the book's popularity among the community. No other biblical book appeared with such frequency. The sectarians clearly regarded Isaiah as specially relevant to their circumstances and beliefs. Paleographic analysis of the scroll's handwriting provided dating confirmation and revealed scribal training methods. The letter forms matched other 1st century BCE manuscripts. Consistent character formation indicated professional scribal education. Occasional lapses suggested the physical challenges of copying lengthy texts. The scroll's preservation resulted from the Dead Sea region's unique environmental conditions. Low humidity, stable temperature, and mineral-rich water created natural preservation effects. Salt deposits from the nearby sea provided additional protection against decay and insect damage. Chemical analysis of the ink revealed sophisticated ancient technology. Scribes mixed carbon black with plant gums and metallic compounds to create permanent writing medium. This formula proved more durable than many modern inks. The recipe demonstrated advanced knowledge of chemistry and materials science. Comparison with other ancient biblical manuscripts revealed the existence of multiple textual traditions in antiquity. The Qumran texts sometimes agreed with the Hebrew Masoretic tradition, sometimes with the Greek Septuagint, and occasionally presented unique readings found nowhere else. This textual diversity suggested that biblical books circulated in various forms during the Second Temple period. Standardization occurred later through rabbinic efforts to establish authoritative versions. The process involved careful selection among available textual options. Modern translation committees now regularly consult the Qumran Isaiah when making decisions about difficult passages. Dead Sea readings sometimes clarify obscure Hebrew phrases. Alternative textual traditions provide insight into ancient interpretive practices. The scroll's discovery revolutionized understanding of Jewish religious practices during the intertestamental period. The Qumran community's intensive biblical study and commentary demonstrated sophisticated hermeneutical methods. Their interpretive techniques influenced both early Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism. Conservation efforts have ensured the scroll's continued availability for research. Digital photography captured every detail before physical deterioration could progress. Advanced imaging techniques revealed previously invisible text. Climate-controlled storage facilities protect the fragile leather from further damage. Recent technological advances continue to yield new discoveries from the scroll. Multispectral imaging reveals text that appears invisible to normal observation. Computer analysis identifies scribal hands and editorial layers. These methods extract maximum information from the ancient manuscript. The scroll's influence extends beyond academic biblical studies. Museum exhibitions allow public viewing of actual biblical text from Jesus' era. Educational programs help students understand ancient book production and preservation. Popular media frequently features the scroll as example of archaeological discovery's importance. Other ancient Isaiah manuscripts complement the Qumran evidence. Greek papyri from Egypt preserve portions of Isaiah's text translated for Hellenistic Jewish communities. Syriac versions show how Isaiah's prophecies spoke to early Christian churches. Each manuscript tradition contributes unique perspectives on textual development. Medieval Hebrew manuscripts, particularly those preserved by the Masoretic tradition, provide additional comparison points. These carefully copied texts show how Jewish scribes maintained textual accuracy across centuries. Their vowel pointing and accent marks preserve ancient pronunciation traditions. The cumulative manuscript evidence demonstrates remarkable stability in Isaiah's textual transmission. While minor variations exist, the essential content and structure remain consistent across centuries and cultures. This stability supports confidence in contemporary biblical texts' faithfulness to ancient originals. Contemporary scholarship continues to mine the Qumran Isaiah for new insights. Each generation of researchers brings fresh perspectives and improved analytical methods. The scroll remains a living document that continues to inform understanding of biblical prophecy and ancient Jewish thought. Isaiah in Islam. Across the centuries, Islamic scholars encountered Isaiah's prophecies through complex weaves of tradition and interpretation. More than distant Hebrew scripture, these ancient words found echoes in Islamic thought about prophecy, divine revelation, and the unfolding of sacred history. Though not central to Islamic belief, Isaiah's influence appears in surprising places throughout Muslim intellectual tradition. The Quran does not explicitly name Isaiah among its prophets, yet Islamic tradition recognizes him as one of the messengers sent to guide humanity. Classical Muslim historians placed him among the prophets of Bani Israel who received divine revelation before Muhammad's mission. His role complemented rather than competed with Quranic prophecy. Early Islamic exegetes studied biblical texts to understand the religious landscape that preceded Islam. They found in Isaiah prophecies that seemed to anticipate Muhammad's coming. The promise of a messenger to the nations appeared to Muslims as divine preparation for Islam's universal message. Particularly intriguing to Muslim commentators was Isaiah's vision of worship flowing from many lands toward a sacred center. The pilgrimage to Mecca seemed to fulfill ancient prophetic promises about peoples gathering from distant regions to glorify God. Isaiah's universal vision aligned with Islam's global reach. The prophet's emphasis on social justice resonated deeply with Islamic values. Isaiah's condemnation of oppression, his advocacy for the poor, and his insistence on righteous governance matched Quranic teachings about social responsibility. Both traditions demanded that religious devotion translate into ethical action. Medieval Islamic scholars approached biblical texts with sophisticated analytical methods. They distinguished between authentic prophetic content and later editorial additions. They recognized that textual transmission across centuries could introduce changes while preserving essential spiritual truths. Some Muslim commentators found in Isaiah's suffering servant passages prefigurations of various Islamic figures. The description of one who bears others' burdens and brings healing through suffering suggested parallels to revered personalities in Islamic history. The mystical dimension of Isaiah's prophecies attracted Sufi attention. His visions of divine holiness and cosmic transformation provided vocabulary for describing spiritual experience. The prophet's encounter with seraphim became a model for mystical ascension narratives. Islamic theological discussions about prophetic inspiration drew occasionally from Isaiah's example. His call narrative in chapter 6 illustrated how divine revelation overwhelms human recipients while commissioning them for service. The burning coal symbolized purification necessary for prophetic ministry. Interfaith dialogue during Islam's classical period brought Muslim and Jewish scholars into conversation about Isaiah's meaning. These discussions revealed shared appreciation for the prophet's ethical teachings while highlighting different interpretive traditions. Muslims and Jews found common ground in Isaiah's monotheistic vision. The Andalusian period of Islamic civilization saw particularly rich engagement with biblical literature. Muslim philosophers like Averroes studied Hebrew prophets alongside Greek philosophers. They found in Isaiah confirmation of rational approaches to understanding divine unity and justice. Islamic historical chronicles occasionally referenced Isaiah when describing ancient Middle Eastern events. Muslim historians recognized him as a significant figure in the religious development of the region that would later become Islam's heartland. His influence shaped the spiritual climate that preceded Muhammad's mission. Some Islamic traditions suggest that Isaiah's tomb lies in various locations throughout the Middle East. These sites became places of pilgrimage for Muslims who revered his prophetic status. Local legends often connected Isaiah to miraculous events that demonstrated divine favor. The Protestant Reformation's emphasis on biblical authority prompted some Muslim scholars to re-examine prophetic texts, including Isaiah. They found vindication for Islamic positions about divine unity in the prophet's strict monotheism. Isaiah's rejection of idolatry supported Muslim critiques of Christian Trinitarian doctrine. Modern Islamic scholarship approaches biblical texts with historical critical methods while maintaining religious respect for prophetic figures. Contemporary Muslim academics study Isaiah within his ancient Near Eastern context while appreciating his continuing spiritual significance. Some Islamic liberation theologians draw inspiration from Isaiah's social justice message. The prophet's advocacy for the oppressed resonates with contemporary Muslim concerns about poverty, injustice, and political oppression. Isaiah becomes a voice for revolutionary change within established religious frameworks. The establishment of Israel in 1948 complicated Muslim relationships with Hebrew biblical texts. Political tensions affected how Islamic scholars approached Jewish scriptural interpretation. Isaiah's prophecies about return to the land became contested territory in contemporary Middle Eastern discourse. Nevertheless, academic Islamic studies continue to engage seriously with biblical literature, including Isaiah. University programs in the Muslim world include courses on Hebrew prophecy as part of religious studies curricula. Scholarly conferences bring together Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars to discuss shared textual heritage. Contemporary Muslim-Christian dialogue often finds common ground in Isaiah's prophetic vision. Both traditions value his emphasis on divine transcendence, ethical behavior, and ultimate hope for human redemption. These shared themes provide foundation for mutual understanding despite theological differences. Islamic feminist scholars have discovered in Isaiah's prophecies resources for advocating women's rights. The prophet's inclusive vision of divine blessing extends to all peoples, regardless of gender or social status. These passages support arguments for gender equality within Islamic legal frameworks. The global Islamic community's diversity creates multiple approaches to biblical texts like Isaiah. African Muslims may emphasize liberation themes, while Asian Muslims focus on mystical dimensions. European Muslim scholars often employ historical critical methods in their interpretive work. Digital technology has made biblical texts more accessible to Muslim readers worldwide. Online resources allow Islamic scholars to study Hebrew texts alongside traditional Islamic sources. This access promotes more and more nuanced understanding of interfaith connections. Some contemporary Islamic thinkers argue that an appreciation for biblical prophets like Isaiah enriches rather than threatens Muslim identity. They suggest that recognizing shared spiritual heritage strengthens interfaith relationships without compromising Islamic distinctiveness. The question of biblical authority remains complex within Islamic thought. While respecting Isaiah as divine messenger, Muslims maintain that the Quran provides final and complete revelation. Biblical texts offer historical interest and spiritual insight without displacing Quranic authority. Educational institutions in Muslim-majority countries increasingly include comparative religion courses that examine figures like Isaiah. These programs promote religious literacy while fostering respect for diverse faith traditions. Students learn to appreciate prophetic literature across religious boundaries. Islamic art occasionally incorporates themes from Isaiah's prophecies, particularly visions of universal peace and divine glory. Calligraphy, architecture, and decorative arts sometimes draw inspiration from biblical prophetic imagery while maintaining distinctively Islamic aesthetic principles. The humanitarian emphasis in Isaiah's message appeals to Muslim charitable organizations. His concern for refugees, orphans, and the marginalized aligns with Islamic principles of social responsibility. These shared values create opportunities for interfaith cooperation in addressing human need. Contemporary Islamic theology continues to wrestle with questions about revelation, prophecy, and scriptural interpretation that Isaiah's example illuminates. While maintaining commitment to Islamic distinctiveness, Muslim scholars recognize valuable insights in the broader prophetic tradition that includes figures like Isaiah. Echoes of Empire, Isaiah and Modern Politics. Throughout history's corridors of power, Isaiah's words have whispered in the ears of kings and revolutionaries alike. More than ancient religious text, these prophecies became political manifestos, battle cries, and blueprints for social transformation. Presidents quoted them from podiums, protesters shouted them in streets. Empires rose and fell while claiming Isaiah's authorization. American founding fathers discovered in Isaiah justification for revolutionary resistance against British rule. The prophet's condemnation of oppressive rulers provided scriptural support for political rebellion. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees became a rallying cry against taxation without representation. The Massachusetts Bay Colony's seal featured Isaiah's words, "Come over and help us." Puritan settlers believed they were establishing God's kingdom in the New World. Isaiah's vision of righteousness flowing like a mighty stream inspired their social experiments in Christian governance. During the American Civil War, both North and South claimed Isaiah's prophetic authority. Abolitionists found in his words divine condemnation of slavery. Let the oppressed go free, break every yoke. Confederate preachers emphasized passages about divine judgment falling upon rebellious peoples. Abraham Lincoln wove Isaiah's language throughout his speeches, particularly the second inaugural address. The president's reference to the judgments of the Lord echoed Isaiah's theological framework. Lincoln presented the war as divine punishment for national sin, requiring humility rather than triumph. The civil rights movement discovered powerful resources in Isaiah's justice prophecies. Martin Luther King Jr. repeatedly quoted the vision of valleys lifted up and mountains brought low. The prophet's promise that every valley shall be exalted became metaphor for racial equality. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech climaxed with Isaiah's words about rough places being made plain. The prophet's geographical metaphors transformed into social promises. Ancient promises about physical landscape became contemporary hopes for moral transformation. Liberation theology throughout Latin America drew extensively from Isaiah's social criticism. The prophet's advocacy for the poor resonated with communities suffering under oppressive regimes. Isaiah became the patron saint of revolutionary Christianity. Nicaraguan Sandinistas incorporated biblical imagery, including Isaiah's passages, into their revolutionary rhetoric. The prophets promised that the meek shall inherit the earth, justified violent resistance against dictatorial rule. Sacred text became political program. South African apartheid resistance found inspiration in Isaiah's prophecies about justice rolling down like waters. The prophet's universal vision challenged racial segregation's theological justifications. Isaiah's God showed no favoritism based on ethnic identity. Desmond Tutu frequently preached from Isaiah during the struggle against apartheid. The Archbishop's sermons connected ancient prophetic criticism with contemporary political resistance. Isaiah's words became weapons against systemic oppression. American presidential inaugurations regularly feature readings from Isaiah. The peaceful kingdom passages provide hopeful visions for incoming administrations. Politicians promise to fulfill the prophet's dreams of justice and prosperity for all citizens. Ronald Reagan's presidency frequently invoked Isaiah's image of America as a city upon a hill. This phrase, originally from Jesus but echoing Isaiah's Zion theology, became synonymous with American exceptionalism. The prophet's particular promises became universal political aspirations. The Israeli independence movement found in Isaiah powerful justification for Zionist enterprise. The prophet's promises about return from exile provided religious authorization for political nationalism. Ancient prophecy became modern manifest destiny. David Ben-Gurion quoted Isaiah during Israel's declaration of independence. The prophet's vision of nations flowing toward Jerusalem suggested that Jewish statehood would benefit all humanity. Particular restoration served universal purposes. Contemporary Israeli politics continues to wrestle with Isaiah's prophetic vision. Some politicians emphasize the universal peace passages. Others focus on promises about Israel's special role among nations. The prophet speaks to multiple political constituencies. Palestinian liberation theology has also claimed Isaiah's prophetic authority. The prophet's concern for the oppressed and displaced resonates with Palestinian experience. Justice language provides framework for resistance against occupation. Environmental movements worldwide draw inspiration from Isaiah's creation theology. The prophet's vision of renewed earth speaks to contemporary ecological concerns. Ancient promises about desert blooming become modern hopes for environmental restoration. Climate change activism often employs Isaiah's language about cosmic transformation. The prophet's promise of new heavens and new earth provides vocabulary for environmental renewal. Ecological restoration becomes eschatological hope. Labor union organizers have historically quoted Isaiah's condemnation of economic oppression. The prophet's criticism of those who grind the face of the poor supports workers' rights movements. Ancient economic critique becomes contemporary labor advocacy. Socialist movements in various countries have adopted Isaiah's vision of economic equality. The prophet's promise that they shall build houses and inhabit them appeals to those seeking fair distribution of wealth. Religious language becomes political program. Anti-war movements regularly invoke Isaiah's famous swords into plowshares prophecy. The prophet's vision of universal disarmament provides hope during military conflicts. Ancient peace promises become contemporary political goals. Nuclear disarmament campaigns have adopted Isaiah's peaceful kingdom imagery as their symbol. The prophet's vision of harmless wolves and lambs speaks to hopes for ending weapons of mass destruction. Biblical metaphor becomes political reality. Immigration advocacy groups find support in Isaiah's welcome for foreigners and outcasts. The prophet's inclusive vision challenges xenophobic political rhetoric. Ancient hospitality commands become contemporary policy proposals. Women's rights movements discover resources in Isaiah's prophecies about divine vindication of the oppressed. The prophet's promise that the last shall be first supports gender equality campaigns. Religious authority backs political transformation. LGBTQ+ advocacy organizations cite Isaiah's welcome for eunuchs and outcasts. The prophet's radical inclusion challenges traditional social boundaries. Ancient acceptance becomes contemporary civil rights platform. Economic justice campaigns worldwide employ Isaiah's critique of wealth inequality. The prophet's condemnation of those who join house to house resonates with concerns about economic concentration. Biblical social criticism becomes political analysis. Healthcare reform movements find in Isaiah support for universal care. The prophet's promise about healing for all nations suggests medical care as divine right rather than commercial privilege. Religious vision becomes political program. Educational equity advocates, quote, Isaiah's promise that all your children shall be taught by the Lord. The prophet's democratic vision of universal knowledge supports public education initiatives. Ancient learning becomes contemporary policy. Immigration detention critics invoke Isaiah's command to loose the bonds of wickedness. The prophet's concern for imprisoned innocents challenges harsh immigration policies. Religious compassion becomes political resistance. Anti-corruption campaigns employ Isaiah's critique of dishonest leaders. The prophet's condemnation of those who call evil good and good evil applies to contemporary political scandals. Ancient moral standards become modern political expectations. The global reach of Isaiah's political influence demonstrates the enduring power of prophetic literature. These ancient words continue to inspire political movements across cultures and centuries. Religious text becomes political manifesto, sacred vision becomes social program. Isaiah's theological bombshells. Deep within Isaiah's prophecies lie ideas so radical they continue to explode conventional religious thinking. More than ancient theology, these concepts challenged fundamental assumptions about God, humanity, and cosmic reality. Each revelation detonated comfortable beliefs while opening new spiritual territories for exploration. The prophet's vision of divine holiness redefined humanity's relationship with the sacred. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. This wasn't merely elevated language about divine greatness. Isaiah proclaimed that ultimate reality pervaded all existence while remaining utterly transcendent. Traditional ancient Near Eastern religion compartmentalized sacred and profane realms. Gods inhabited temples, mountains, or celestial spheres. Ordinary life proceeded in separate secular territory. Isaiah shattered these boundaries by declaring that divine presence filled the entire cosmos while maintaining absolute otherness. This theological revolution created profound implications for human behavior. If divine holiness saturated all existence, then every action carried ultimate significance. Political decisions, economic choices, and social relationships became matters of cosmic importance. Nothing remained religiously neutral territory. The prophet's radical monotheism challenged polytheistic assumptions that dominated ancient thought. I am the first, and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. This wasn't merely claiming supremacy among competing deities. Isaiah declared that other gods simply didn't exist. Ancient religious thought typically acknowledged multiple divine powers governing different spheres of reality. Weather gods controlled storms. Fertility goddesses managed reproduction. War deities influenced battles. Isaiah proclaimed one divine will behind all natural and historical phenomena. This theological shift demanded complete reconceptualization of religious practice. Temple rituals couldn't manipulate divine favor through proper technique. Prayer couldn't pit one god against another. Worship became encounter with absolute reality rather than transaction with limited powers. The universality of divine concern exploded ethnic and national boundaries. In that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt, and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth. Traditional religion focused on particular peoples and territories. Isaiah envisioned divine blessing embracing historical enemies. This universal scope challenged assumptions about special divine favorites. Religious communities typically claimed exclusive access to divine favor. Isaiah suggested that God's purposes encompassed all nations and peoples. Particular elections served universal salvation rather than exclusive privilege. The prophet's suffering servant theology revolutionized understanding of divine power. Traditional ancient thought associated divinity with triumph, wealth, and domination. Isaiah described divine purposes accomplished through rejection, poverty, and apparent defeat. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. This passage presented power operating through powerlessness. Divine victory emerged from apparent failure. Ultimate strength manifested in radical vulnerability. This theological paradox challenged fundamental assumptions about how divine power operated in human affairs. Military conquest, political domination, and economic success became questionable indicators of divine favor. Suffering and service might reveal divine purposes more clearly than triumph and domination. Isaiah's creation theology linked environmental concern with religious devotion. The earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers. The prophet connected ecological health with human moral behavior. Environmental degradation reflected spiritual corruption. Traditional religion often treated natural world as mere backdrop for human drama. Isaiah presented creation as active participant in divine purposes. Mountains and trees could rejoice, rivers could clap their hands. The entire cosmos participated in redemptive history. This ecological theology demanded radical expansion of ethical concern beyond human relationships. Care for creation became religious obligation. Environmental stewardship expressed devotion to divine purposes. Ecological destruction constituted spiritual rebellion. The prophet's economic theology challenged assumptions about wealth and poverty. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field until there is no more room. Economic concentration violated divine intentions for human community. Isaiah didn't merely advocate charity toward the poor. He questioned economic systems that created poverty alongside wealth. Divine justice demanded structural transformation rather than individual generosity. Economic arrangements became matters of ultimate theological significance. This social criticism extended beyond personal morality into systemic analysis. Religious faith required attention to economic policies and their effects on human welfare. Worship became empty ritual unless accompanied by economic justice. The prophet's political theology refused separation between religious and governmental spheres. Kings and rulers faced divine judgment for their policies. Political power carried religious accountability that transcended national boundaries. By the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. Divine authority superseded human political claims. Earthly rulers exercised delegated rather than absolute power. Political decisions faced cosmic scrutiny and ultimate accountability. This theological position created tension between religious loyalty and political obedience. Citizens couldn't simply follow governmental authority without moral evaluation. Religious conviction might demand political resistance when human laws contradicted divine purposes. Isaiah's eschatological vision exploded linear concepts of historical progression. Behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. Divine purposes weren't merely accomplished through historical development, but required cosmic transformation. Traditional religion typically focused on maintaining cosmic order against chaotic forces. Isaiah envisioned divine power creating entirely new realities. The future wouldn't simply improve the present, but transcend current limitations entirely. This radical hope provided resources for resisting present circumstances while working toward transformation. Ultimate divine purposes weren't constrained by current political, economic, or social arrangements. Revolutionary change became not just possible, but inevitable. The prophet's theological innovations continue to challenge religious thinking across traditions. Each generation discovers new implications in these ancient revelations. Contemporary theology still wrestles with tensions between particular and universal, suffering and power, justice and mercy that Isaiah introduced. These theological bombshells retain their explosive potential. They continue to shatter comfortable religious assumptions while opening new possibilities for understanding divine reality and human responsibility. Isaiah's God remains too large for conventional theological containers. A voice crying out in every age across 27 centuries, Isaiah's voice continues to pierce through the noise of each generation's concerns. More than historical artifact, these prophecies speak with fresh urgency to contemporary crises. Environmental collapse, economic inequality, political corruption, and social injustice, the same issues that stirred the 8th century prophet, still demand prophetic response today. Climate scientists studying global warming discover in Isaiah vocabulary for ecological crisis. The earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers. The prophet's vision of creation groaning under human sin resonates with contemporary environmental research. Ancient theological insight illuminates current scientific data. Environmental activists find in Isaiah both warning and hope. His prophecies about desert blooming speak to restoration possibilities. His promises about renewed creation inspire ecological renewal projects. The prophet becomes ally in contemporary struggles for planetary healing. Economic researchers analyzing wealth inequality rediscover Isaiah's social criticism. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field until there is no more room. The prophet's condemnation of economic concentration applies directly to contemporary debates about wealth distribution and social justice. Labor organizers quote Isaiah's promise that workers will enjoy the fruit of their labor, his vision of economic justice, where they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit, provides hope for fair wages and decent working conditions. Political scientists studying corruption and authoritarianism find relevant analysis in Isaiah's governmental criticism. His condemnation of leaders who call evil good and good evil speaks to contemporary concerns about political dishonesty and moral relativism. Pro-democracy movements worldwide draw inspiration from Isaiah's vision of just governance. The prophet's promise of rulers who will reign in righteousness provides hope for political systems that serve human flourishing rather than elite interests. Refugee advocates discover powerful support in Isaiah's welcome for displaced peoples. His promise that the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord will find acceptance challenges xenophobic attitudes toward immigrants and asylum seekers. International human rights organizations cite Isaiah's universal vision of dignity and worth. The prophet's promise that all flesh shall see the salvation of God supports arguments for universal human rights that transcend national and ethnic boundaries. Healthcare workers fighting global pandemics find encouragement in Isaiah's healing imagery. His promise that the lame shall leap like deer and the eyes of the blind shall be opened inspires medical missions and public health initiatives. Mental health advocates appreciate Isaiah's attention to emotional and spiritual healing. His promise to bind up the brokenhearted and comfort all who mourn speaks to contemporary understanding of trauma recovery and psychological restoration. Educational reformers quote Isaiah's democratic vision of universal learning. All your children shall be taught by the Lord, supports arguments for accessible education regardless of economic status or social background. Prison reform movements find resources in Isaiah's concern for captives. His command to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke challenges harsh criminal justice policies that emphasize punishment over rehabilitation. Social workers serving marginalized communities discover practical theology in Isaiah's justice commands. His instruction to defend the fatherless, plead for the widow provides religious foundation for advocacy work among vulnerable populations. Interfaith dialogue groups appreciate Isaiah's inclusive vision. The prophet's promise that God's house will be a house of prayer for all peoples supports efforts to build bridges between different religious traditions. Peace activists regularly invoke Isaiah's famous swords into plowshares prophecy. This vision of universal disarmament provides hope during international conflicts and arms races. Military budgets face prophetic criticism, while peace initiatives gain religious authorization. Reconciliation movements working to heal ethnic and racial divisions find guidance in Isaiah's unity promises. His vision of former enemies worshiping together provides hope for communities torn apart by historical grievances. Anti-trafficking organizations fighting modern slavery cite Isaiah's liberation commands. His call to loose the bonds of wickedness and undo the heavy burdens directly applies to contemporary efforts to free those trapped in forced labor. Women's rights advocates discover supportive passages in Isaiah's inclusive prophecies. His vision of divine blessing flowing to all peoples regardless of gender provides religious foundation for equality movements. LGBTQ+ rights organizations point to Isaiah's welcome for sexual minorities. His specific inclusion of eunuchs among those welcomed in God's house challenges traditional exclusion of gender and sexual nonconformity. Disability rights activists appreciate Isaiah's attention to physical differences. His prophecies about healing don't eliminate disability, but promise inclusion and dignity for all members of human community. Addiction recovery programs find hope in Isaiah's transformation promises. His vision of beauty for ashes and joy for mourning speaks to possibilities for personal renewal and community restoration. Mental health professionals working with trauma survivors appreciate Isaiah's emotional healing imagery. His promise to heal the brokenhearted provides religious language for psychological restoration and spiritual recovery. Youth activists fighting for their generation's future discover courage in Isaiah's prophetic model. His willingness to speak truth to power despite personal cost inspires contemporary movements for social and environmental justice. Elderly populations find comfort in Isaiah's promises about divine faithfulness. His assurance that God will carry you even to your gray hairs speaks to fears about aging and abandonment. Technology ethicists wrestling with artificial intelligence and digital surveillance cite Isaiah's warnings about human hubris. His condemnation of those who are wise in their own eyes challenges assumptions about technological progress as automatically beneficial. Healthcare systems struggling with equity and access find guidance in Isaiah's healing vision. His promise of restoration for all peoples challenges medical systems that prioritize profit over patient care. Urban planners working on sustainable city development discover inspiration in Isaiah's vision of renewed Jerusalem. His description of cities where violence shall no more be heard and destruction within your borders provides hope for urban renewal projects. Agricultural researchers developing sustainable farming methods find encouragement in Isaiah's promises about land restoration. His vision of desert blooming speaks to possibilities for ecological renewal and food security. The prophet's enduring relevance stems from his combination of unflinching social criticism with unshakable hope for transformation. He refuses to accept current injustices as permanent, while maintaining confidence that positive change remains possible. Contemporary readers across religious traditions find in Isaiah a voice that speaks their deepest concerns while pointing towards solutions that transcend immediate circumstances. The prophet continues to cry out in every age because human needs for justice, peace, and hope remain constant across centuries. His words bridge ancient and modern concerns because they address fundamental questions about divine purposes, human responsibility, and cosmic hope that each generation must answer anew. Isaiah's voice, crying in the wilderness, continues to prepare the way for transformation that encompasses both individual lives and entire societies.